Eleanor Whitmore stood in the dusty parlor of Victor Caldwell's Arizona mansion, her hands trembling as he threw a handful of dollar bills at her feet. "You're too educated for a wife," he spat, his face twisted with disgust. "No man wants a woman who thinks she's smarter than him." 22 years old, 3,000 miles from home, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, this was supposed to be her fresh start. Instead, her intelligence had condemned her once again. But what Eleanor didn't know was that at that very moment, a quiet cowboy was listening outside the door, and her rejection was about to change both their lives forever. If you want to see how Eleanor's story unfolds, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning Eleanor Whitmore left Philadelphia, the autumn rain fell so hard it seemed the sky itself was weeping. She stood on the platform at Broad Street Station, surrounded by 3 heavy trunks that contained nearly everything she owned, and most of that was books. Her father had died 18 months earlier, leaving debts that swallowed their modest home. Her mother had remarried within 6 months, choosing a humorless banker who made it clear there was no room in his orderly life for a stepdaughter with peculiar ideas about her place in the world. Eleanor was educated, extensively, almost radically so for a woman of 1883. Her father, a professor of literature, had taught her as he would have taught a son. She could read Latin and Greek, discuss philosophy and political theory, recite poetry in 3 languages. She had devoured every book in his library, then sought out more. She wrote essays, kept detailed journals, corresponded with her father's colleagues about matters of science and art, and it had cost her everything. 3 marriage proposals had been extended and then hastily withdrawn when suitors discovered the depth of her learning. Unnatural, one mother had called her. "She'll make a man feel small," another had warned. Her own mother had begged her to hide her intelligence, to pretend ignorance, to make herself less. But Eleanor couldn't. She wouldn't. So when she saw the advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer, "Prosperous merchant in Arizona Territory seeks cultured wife for companionship and partnership," she had answered it with desperate hope. Victor Caldwell's letters had been eloquent, full of references to literature and art, promising a life where her mind would be valued. He sent money for passage. He seemed, impossibly, to be the answer to everything. The journey west had taken 2 weeks. Train to Chicago, then another to Kansas City, then the brutal stage route through Colorado and New Mexico into Arizona Territory. Eleanor read during every mile, trying to ignore the stares of other passengers, the whispered comments about a woman traveling alone. She rehearsed conversations she might have with Mr. Caldwell, imagined the life they might build together. The town of Redemption Creek was nothing like Philadelphia. It was barely a town at all, a scatter of wooden buildings along a single dusty street surrounded by endless brown hills that rolled toward distant mountains. The air was thin and searingly dry. Everything smelled of dust and horses and something wild she couldn't name. Victor Caldwell met her at the stage stop personally, and Eleanor's first flutter of doubt began. He was older than she'd imagined, perhaps 50, with silver threading his dark hair. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, his smile tight and practiced. His eyes, when they swept over her, held an appraising quality that made her skin prickle. "Miss Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to Arizona." "Mr. Caldwell." She shook his hand, noting how quickly he released hers. "Thank you for—" "Let's get your things to the house," he interrupted, gesturing to a well-appointed carriage. "We have much to discuss." The ride to his home was uncomfortable. Caldwell asked about her journey but seemed uninterested in her answers, cutting her off mid-sentence to point out his various properties: the general store, the hotel, the saloon. "I own most of the commercial buildings in Redemption Creek," he said with undisguised pride. "And I have mining interests in the hills. A man has to diversify in this territory." His house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a 2-story structure that was grand by frontier standards but would have been modest in Philadelphia. Inside, it was showily decorated: heavy furniture, thick carpets, paintings in gilded frames that looked expensive but graceless. "I'll have the housekeeper show you to your room," Caldwell said. "We'll dine at 7. There are expectations we need to discuss." That first dinner was the beginning of the end. though Eleanor didn't fully realize it yet. She came down in her best dress, dark green silk that had been her mother's, carefully preserved. She had arranged her auburn hair in the fashion she'd seen in recent magazines, had practiced her posture and her smile. Caldwell was waiting in the dining room, a room of dark wood and crystal that felt more like a museum than a home. He gestured to a chair, and Eleanor sat, folding her hands in her lap. "You're younger than I expected," he said abruptly. "I'm 22, I stated so clearly in my letters." "Yes, well, letters can be misleading." He poured himself wine but didn't offer her any. "Tell me about your education." Eleanor brightened, thinking this was her moment. "My father was a professor of literature at—" "Your father taught you himself?" Caldwell's eyebrows rose. "Yes, he believed education should be—" "And your mother permitted this?" Something in his tone made Eleanor hesitate. "She supported my father's choices." "I see." Caldwell cut into his beef with sharp, precise movements. "And what exactly did this education consist of?" Eleanor described her studies, the languages, the literature, the philosophy, the sciences. She spoke of the books she'd read, the essays she'd written, the discussions she'd had with her father's colleagues. She was animated, passionate, hoping desperately that this man who had written so eloquently about seeking a cultured wife would understand. Instead, his face grew progressively darker. "You studied philosophy?" he said when she paused for breath. "Political theory?" "Yes, I found Plato particularly fascinating, and the debate between—" "You have opinions about politics?" Eleanor felt the first cold tendril of real fear. I have thoughts about civic engagement, and do you have opinions about everything, Miss Whitmore?" His voice was sharp now, cutting. I try to think critically about that," Caldwell said, setting down his fork with a sharp click, "is precisely the problem." The meal continued in painful silence. Eleanor barely tasted her food. She watched Caldwell's face, saw the calculation there, the growing displeasure, and felt her carefully constructed hope beginning to crumble. After dinner, he led her to his study, a room lined with books that, she noted with sinking heart, all appeared untouched, their spines uncreased. They were decorations, nothing more. "I should clarify what I meant by cultured," Caldwell said, standing behind his desk like a magistrate. "I wanted a wife with enough education to hostess properly, to make conversation about art and music, to demonstrate to business associates that I'm a man of refined tastes. I wanted someone who could appreciate culture, not someone who thinks she's a scholar." "Mr. Caldwell, I don't think I'm—" "You mentioned in your letters that you read," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "I assumed you meant novels, light reading, perhaps some poetry. I didn't realize you'd been allowed to study men's subjects." "Men's subjects?" Eleanor felt anger beginning to burn through her fear. "Philosophy, political theory, sciences. These are not appropriate areas of study for women, Miss Whitmore. Surely you understand that." "I understand that many people believe that, but many people believe that because it's true." Caldwell's voice was rising. "A woman's mind is not suited for rigorous intellectual work. It's a medical fact. When women overtax their brains with unsuitable study, it damages their reproductive organs, their nervous systems." "That's not true," Eleanor said quietly. "Those theories have been thoroughly debunked by—" "And there it is!" Caldwell slammed his hand on the desk. "You're arguing with me, contradicting me, in my own home. Is this what you plan to do at dinner parties? Make my guests uncomfortable with your opinions? Make me look like I can't control my own wife?" Eleanor stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "Mr. Caldwell, you wrote to me about seeking companionship and partnership. Those were your words." "I sought a companion, yes. Someone pleasant and decorative. Not a blue-stocking who thinks she's my intellectual equal." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I never claimed to be—" "You didn't have to claim it. It radiates from you. The way you speak, the way you hold yourself, the way you look at everything like you're analyzing it." He moved around the desk toward her. "Let me be clear, Miss Whitmore. If we were to marry, I would expect you to put aside this pretense of learning. You would be my wife, You would manage my household, entertain my guests, and present yourself as a credit to me. You would not express opinions on subjects beyond your ken. You would not contradict me. You would not make me look foolish by being too educated." Eleanor felt something inside her break and harden simultaneously. "And if I can't do that? Then this arrangement is not going to work." They stared at each other across the expensive carpet, across the unbridgeable gap between what she had hoped for and what he was offering. "I need time to think," Eleanor said finally. "Take all the time you need," Caldwell replied coldly. "But understand, I won't have a wife who makes me look weak. I've worked too hard to build my position in this territory to have it undermined by a woman who doesn't know her place." Eleanor fled to her room, her heart hammering. She stood at the window, looking out at the alien landscape, and felt the full weight of her situation crushing down on her. She had no money for return passage. Her mother's house was closed to her. She had no friends in this territory, no connections, no resources, and she had been a fool to hope. The next 2 days were a nightmare of strained silence. Caldwell watched her during meals with cold assessment. His housekeeper, a thin woman named Mrs. Garrison, treated Eleanor with barely concealed contempt. Eleanor spent hours in her room, reading to calm herself, trying to figure out what to do. On the third morning, Caldwell summoned her to his study. "I've made my decision," he said without preamble. "This arrangement won't work. You're not suitable." Eleanor had known it was coming, but the words still stung. "I see. I'm not heartless," he continued. "I'll give you money for stage passage back east, and a bit extra for your trouble." He pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. "There's a stage leaving tomorrow at noon." Eleanor stared at the envelope. Inside, she knew, was maybe $50, enough to get her partway back to Philadelphia, if she was lucky. Not enough to restart her life. "I came here in good faith," she said quietly. "And I brought you here in good faith," Caldwell countered. "It's not my fault that you misrepresented yourself." "I didn't misrepresent, so you did. You let me believe you were educated, not overeducated. There's a difference, Miss Whitmore. A crucial difference." He pushed the envelope across the desk. "Take it and go. Find some man who doesn't mind being humiliated by his wife's pretensions." Something in Eleanor snapped. "My education is not a pretension. My intelligence is not an insult to you. The fact that you feel threatened by a woman who can think—" "Get out!" Caldwell's voice was ice. "Take the money and get out of my house. Now!" "I'll leave in the morning, as you suggested." "No. Now. Mrs. Garrison will have your trunks sent to the hotel. You can wait there for the stage." He stood, his face flushed with anger. "I won't spend another night under the same roof as a woman who speaks to me this way." Eleanor wanted to scream, to cry, to throw his money back in his face, but she was alone in a strange territory, dependent on his grudging charity to even survive the next few days. So she took the envelope. Mrs. Garrison packed her things with obvious satisfaction. Within an hour, Eleanor was walking down the hill into town, her reticule clutched in one hand, her dignity in tatters. The hotel was a rough establishment, more boarding house than hotel, but the proprietor took Caldwell's money and showed her to a small, clean room. Eleanor sat on the narrow bed and finally let herself cry. All her life, her intelligence had been a liability. Her mother had warned her. Society had rejected her. And now, 3,000 miles from home, she had been cast aside again for the crime of knowing too much. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she sat in the growing darkness, trying to plan. The stage left tomorrow. She could go to Denver, maybe, or back to Kansas City, find work somewhere. But doing what? Teaching positions for women were scarce and poorly paid. She had no skills except her mind, and her mind was apparently her greatest curse. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Eleanor dressed in her traveling clothes and went downstairs to arrange for her trunks to be taken to the stage depot. The hotel's dining room was nearly empty, just a few ranch hands eating breakfast, a traveling salesman reading a newspaper. Eleanor ordered coffee she couldn't afford and toast she couldn't eat, and watched the clock creep toward noon. At 11:30, she walked to the depot, a ramshackle building at the edge of town. Her trunks were already there, looking dusty and sad. The stage was being prepared, horses being hitched. Eleanor sat on a bench outside the depot, and waited to leave the life she'd briefly imagined behind. And that's when she heard the voice. "Miss Whitmore?" She turned to see a man approaching, tall, lean, maybe 30, with sun-darkened skin and gray eyes that held something between concern and curiosity. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher: worn denim, a sun-faded shirt, a hat that had seen years of use. There was a quiet competence about him, a steadiness that was immediately noticeable. "Yes?" Eleanor said warily. "I'm Daniel Mercer, foreman at Red Mesa Ranch, about 10 miles north of here." He removed his hat, revealing brown hair streaked with gold from the sun. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I heard about your situation with Mr. Caldwell." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn. "The whole town knows, I suppose." "It's a small town," Daniel said gently, "and Caldwell's not known for his discretion." He hesitated. "I also heard why he sent you away." Eleanor stood, defensive. "Then you know I'm apparently too educated to be anyone's wife." "I know Caldwell's a fool," Daniel said bluntly, "and I know you might be exactly what Red Mesa Ranch needs." Eleanor stared at him, not understanding. "The ranch is owned by Clara Bennett," Daniel continued. "Her late husband started it 20 years ago. She runs it now with help from me and about a dozen hands. She's got a strong belief that education matters out here, that it's not enough to just survive. We need to think and grow and learn." He met Eleanor's eyes. "She's been trying to establish a proper school for the ranch children and the kids from the surrounding homesteads, but we can't find a teacher. Not out here. Not one willing to come this far from civilization." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "You're offering me a teaching position?" "I'm offering you the chance to meet Mrs. Bennett," Daniel said carefully, "to see the ranch, see the school building, meet the children, if you're interested, if you're not already set on leaving." Eleanor looked at the stage, at her trunks, at the ticket she held in her hand. Then she looked back at this quiet-spoken man with his honest eyes and his impossible offer. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You don't know me." "I know you came 3,000 miles hoping for something better," Daniel said. "I know Caldwell rejected you for being educated, which tells me you're probably more educated than anyone else in this territory. And I know—" He paused. "I heard you the other morning at Caldwell's house. I was there delivering an order from the ranch, and I heard you in his study telling him that education wasn't a pretension." Eleanor felt her face flush again. "You were listening?" "I didn't mean to, but once I started hearing what he was saying to you, I couldn't make myself leave." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "He was wrong, Miss Whitmore, dead wrong. And I thought maybe you deserve better than being run out of town for the crime of having a good mind." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a small, fragile stirring of hope. "This school, how many children?" 8 right now, ranging from 6 to 13. Could be more if word spreads that we have a real teacher." "And Mrs. Bennett would really hire a woman who's been rejected as too educated?" "Mrs. Bennett," Daniel said with a slight smile, "would probably want to hire you specifically because you've been rejected as too educated. She's got strong opinions about women's capabilities." Eleanor thought about Denver, about Kansas City, about crawling back east with her tail between her legs. Then she thought about 8 children who needed a teacher, about a ranch owner who believed education mattered, about this man who had heard her humiliation and offered her dignity instead. "I'd like to meet meet Bennett," she said. Daniel's smile widened. "The stage to Red Mesa doesn't leave until tomorrow morning. I've got a wagon. I can take you out this afternoon, let you see the place, talk to Mrs. Bennett. If it's not right, I'll bring you back in time for tomorrow's stage east." "And my trunks?" "I'll have them held at the depot until you decide." Eleanor looked one more time at the eastbound stage, at the life she'd left behind, at all the doors that had closed in her face. Then she turned to Daniel Mercer and said, "Let's go to Red Mesa." The ride north was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced. Daniel's wagon was practical but well-maintained, pulled by 2 sturdy horses that seemed to know the route by heart. The road, barely more than a track really, wound through landscape that was both harsh and beautiful. The brown hills she'd found so desolate from Caldwell's window revealed themselves to be alive with subtle color: gold grasses, silver green sage, rust red rock formations. Daniel didn't talk much at first, for which Eleanor was grateful. She was still processing what she'd just done, still half convinced she was making another terrible mistake. But gradually, as the miles passed, he began to speak. "Red Mesa's been Bennett land for 23 years, he said. Thomas Bennett came out here with almost nothing, built it up from scratch. When he died 5 years ago, everyone expected Clara to sell out, move back east. Instead, she stayed and kept building." "That must have been difficult," Eleanor said. "She's a difficult woman," Daniel said, but there was clear affection in his voice. "In the best way. Doesn't suffer fools, doesn't believe in limitations. When Hans told her a woman couldn't run a ranch, she worked twice as hard to prove them wrong." "And the school?" "That was Thomas's dream, actually. He believed that ranching families shouldn't have to choose between education and land. But he died before he could make it happen. Clara's been trying to honor that dream." Eleanor studied Daniel's profile: the straight nose, the strong jaw, the weathered creases at the corners of his eyes. "And you? How did you come to Red Mesa?" "Answered an advertisement like you," Daniel said with a wry smile. 7 years ago, I was working cattle drives, no permanent home, saw that the Bennetts were looking for a foreman willing to settle. I was ready to settle." "Are you from the territory originally?" "Colorado. My father was a miner. Died when I was 12. I've been working since." He glanced at her. "Didn't have much schooling, Miss Whitmore. Can read and do figures, but that's about it." There was no shame in his voice, but Eleanor heard something underneath. A wistfulness, perhaps. A hunger. "Reading and figures are more than many people have," she said gently. "True enough. But sometimes I see the books Mrs. Bennett has in her library, or I hear the hands talking about places they've been and things they've learned, and I think—" He trailed off. "You think what?" "I think there's a whole world I'm missing," he said simply. "A world in books and ideas and ways of thinking. I've seen a lot of the physical world, mountains and plains and rivers. But the world of the mind, that's something I'd like to explore." Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. "That's beautifully put." Daniel looked embarrassed. "Not sure about beautiful, but it's honest." They fell into comfortable silence after that, and Eleanor found herself relaxing for the first time in days. There was something deeply peaceful about Daniel Mercer, a quietness that wasn't empty but full, a stillness that spoke of depth rather than absence. Red Mesa Ranch appeared as they crested a rise, a sprawling collection of buildings in a wide valley, with red rock mesas rising dramatically to the north. The main house was large but unpretentious, built of adobe and wood. Around it clustered barns, corrals, bunkhouses, storage buildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. It looked prosperous but hard-working, beautiful but practical. "That building there," Daniel pointed to a small structure near the main house, "that's the schoolhouse. Thomas built it himself the year before he died." Eleanor studied it, a simple one-room building with windows on 3 sides and a small porch. It looked waiting somehow. Ready. Daniel pulled the wagon up to the main house, and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 50, tall and spare, with iron gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She wore men's trousers and boots, a simple shirt, and a leather vest. "Daniel," she said, her voice strong and clear, "this is your mysterious passenger?" "Mrs. Bennett, this is Miss Eleanor Whitmore," Daniel said, helping Eleanor down from the wagon. "Miss Whitmore? Clara Bennett?" Clara descended the porch steps and extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze assessing but not unkind. "Daniel tells me you've had a rough introduction to our territory," she said bluntly. "That's an accurate assessment," Eleanor said. "Victor Caldwell is a pompous ass who believes women are decorative objects," Clara said flatly. "I assume he rejected you for having a brain?" Despite everything, Eleanor felt a laugh bubble up. "That's also accurate." "His loss, our potential gain." Clara released Eleanor's hand. "Come inside. We'll have coffee and talk." Clara Bennett's house was nothing like Caldwell's showcase. It was comfortable rather than impressive, filled with well-used furniture, books everywhere, maps on the walls, a desk piled with ranch papers. It was the home of someone who worked, who lived, who thought. They sat in Clara's parlor, coffee in simple cups, and Clara got straight to business. "Daniel says you're educated," she said. "How educated?" Eleanor outlined her studies again, but this time she didn't try to soften it. She laid out exactly what she'd learned, how she'd learned it, what she knew. Clara listened intently, her sharp eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Languages," she said when Eleanor finished. "That's good. We have Mexican families nearby, kids who speak more Spanish than English. Philosophy and literature? Excellent. The children need to learn to think, not just memorize. Science. Can you teach practical science? Things they can use?" "I can teach botany, basic chemistry, physics, astronomy," Eleanor said. "My father believed in practical application of knowledge." "Your father sounds like he was a smart man," Clara said. She set down her coffee cup. "Here's what I'm offering, Miss Whitmore. Room and board in this house. I've got extra bedrooms, and I'd welcome the company. $20 a month salary, which I know isn't much, but it's what I can afford. Use of my library whenever you like, and full authority to run the school as you see fit." $20 a month was indeed very little, less than a maid might make in Philadelphia. But room and board was worth something, and access to books was worth more. "What about the children?" Eleanor asked. "Tell me about them." Clara smiled, and it transformed her stern face. "3 of them are my ranch hand's children, tough little things who can ride and rope but can barely write their names. 2 are from the Martinez family over the next ridge. Sweet kids, very bright, need help with English. One's from a homestead family to the south, shy boy, 9 years old, loves numbers. And there are twin girls, 6 years old, from the Smith family, wild as March hares but sharp as tacks." 8 children, Eleanor said. "Different ages, different levels, different backgrounds." "I never said it would be easy," Clara said, "but Daniel seems to think you're up for it, and I'm inclined to trust Daniel's judgment." Eleanor glanced at Daniel, who stood near the window, watching the exchange with quiet interest. "Can I see the schoolhouse?" she asked. "Of course," Clara said. They walked across the yard together, Clara, Eleanor, and Daniel. The afternoon sun was slanting golden across the valley. Ranch hands paused in their work to watch curiously. Eleanor felt their eyes but kept her own gaze forward. The schoolhouse was simple but sound. One large room with a pot-bellied stove in the corner, benches and desks of varying sizes, a battered teacher's desk, a slate board on one wall, shelves waiting for books, windows that let in abundant light. It smelled of dust and possibility. Eleanor walked slowly around the room, touching the desks, imagining them filled. She looked at the slate board and imagined lessons written there. She opened a desk drawer and found a few pieces of chalk, some dried-up ink, a broken pen. "There's not much in the way of supplies," Clara said apologetically. "I have some books in the house I can contribute, paper and ink we can order from Redemption Creek. But it's going to be basic, Miss Whitmore." Eleanor thought about Caldwell's untouched library, about the money he spent on appearances. Then she thought about these 8 children who needed someone to teach them how to think. She turned to face Clara and Daniel. "I'll need a list of what supplies we can afford," she said, "and I'll need to meet the children before I plan the curriculum. But yes, Mrs. Bennett, I accept your offer." Clara's stern face broke into a genuine smile. "Excellent. Daniel, go fetch Miss Whitmore's trunks from the depot. Welcome to Red Mesa Ranch, Miss Whitmore." "Eleanor," she said. "Please, call me Eleanor." "Eleanor, then. And I'm Clara. We don't stand on ceremony out here." Clara shook her hand again. "You can have the room at the end of the upstairs hall. It's got a good writing desk and plenty of light. I'll expect you at dinner at 6. As Clara headed back to the main house, Eleanor lingered in the schoolhouse doorway, looking out at the valley, at the red mesas glowing in the afternoon sun, at the life she was choosing instead of retreat. Daniel had started toward his horse but turned back. "I'm glad you stayed," he said simply. "So am I," Eleanor replied, and realized she meant it. "Miss Whitmore." "Eleanor." Daniel hesitated. "What you said in the wagon about reading and figures being more than many people have. You didn't say it like you pitied me." "I don't pity you," Eleanor said honestly. "You've built a life through hard work and character. That's admirable. But there's still a lot I don't know," Daniel said. "A lot I'd like to learn. Eleanor looked at this man who had rescued her from humiliation, who spoke of ideas with hunger, who treated her intelligence as a gift rather than a threat. "Then maybe," she said carefully, "we can help each other. I know books. You know this land, this life. We both have things to teach." Daniel's face lit up with something like hope. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." He mounted his horse and rode toward town to collect her trunks, and Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new schoolhouse watching him go, feeling something unfamiliar and precious growing in her chest. For the first time in her adult life, someone had asked to learn from her without resentment or fear. Someone had looked at her education and seen opportunity rather than threat. Eleanor didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could make this rough frontier school into something meaningful. She didn't know if she belonged in this hard, beautiful territory. But as the sun set over Red Mesa Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor Whitmore felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hope. Eleanor's first morning at Red Mesa Ranch began before dawn with the sound of roosters and the low voices of ranch hands heading to the barn. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, a practical brown cotton that had survived the journey better than her finer things, and made her way downstairs following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Clara was already in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for decades. She glanced up as Eleanor entered. "You're up early," she said, cracking eggs into a pan. "City habits or nerves?" "Both, probably," Eleanor admitted. "Can I help?" "Set the table. We feed the hands family style here. Keeps everyone connected." Clara gestured to a stack of plates. "There'll be about 6 of them for breakfast, plus Daniel. The rest take their meals in the bunkhouse." Eleanor had just finished setting places when the men began filing in. Sun-darkened, work-roughened men who nodded politely but eyed her with undisguised curiosity. Daniel came in last, his hair still damp from washing, and took a seat near the end of the table. The conversation during breakfast was ranch business, cattle movements, fence repairs, water concerns. Eleanor listened, fascinated by this world she knew nothing about. These men spoke a language of seasons and animals, of land and weather, of practical problems requiring practical solutions. "Miss Whitmore will be starting the school next Monday," Clara announced as the meal wound down. "I expect your children scrubbed and ready by 8 o'clock sharp. Martinez. And Tom, you tell the Smiths when you ride over to check their fence line." A lean Mexican man with kind eyes nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett, my Rosa and Miguel, they are very excited. Rosa has been practicing her letters." "That's good to hear," Eleanor said, finding her voice. "I'm looking forward to meeting them." After breakfast, Clara took Eleanor to the schoolhouse to assess what they had to work with. The inventory was discouraging. A dozen battered primers of varying ages, a handful of slates, some chalk that crumbled at the touch, exactly 3 pencils, and a water-stained atlas that still showed territories that had long since become states. "It's not much," Clara said, echoing her words from the day before. "It's a start," Eleanor replied, her mind already working. "I have books in my trunks. Not primers, but good literature, some science texts. We can use those. And I can write lessons on the board, have the children copy them onto their slates for practice." "What about mathematics? History?" "I can teach mathematics through practical problems, measuring, calculating, things they'll use. History..." Eleanor paused, thinking. "History is just stories, really. I can tell the stories, and we can discuss them. They don't need fancy textbooks to learn how to think about the past." Clara smiled, that transforming smile that made her stern face warm. "Daniel was right about you. You're a problem solver." Eleanor felt herself flush with pleasure. "I'm practical, if nothing else." They spent the morning organizing the schoolhouse. Clara contributed a small shelf of books from her own library, classic novels, some poetry, a well-worn volume of essays. Eleanor unpacked several of her own books, selecting ones that might engage young minds. Together, they arranged the desks in a semicircle facing the slate board, swept the floors, and polished the windows until they gleamed. By noon, Eleanor's hands were dirty and her back ached, but the schoolhouse looked ready, waiting. The children will come by this afternoon, Clara said. I sent word with the hands. They'll want to meet you before Monday. Eleanor's stomach tightened with nerves. All of them? Most, probably. Frontier children are curious creatures. Clara studied her. You've taught before? I've tutored my father's colleagues' children sometimes, but never a formal class. Well, you'll figure it out. You're too smart not to. Clara headed toward the door, then paused. Eleanor, a word of advice. Don't try to be perfect. These children don't need perfect. They need real. The children began arriving around 2 o'clock. First came the Martinez siblings, Rosa, a solemn 8-year-old with long black braids, and Miguel, 6, who hid behind his sister's skirt. Their father brought them, hat in hand, his English careful and formal. This is Miss Whitmore, he told them in Spanish, then English. She will be your teacher. You will listen. You will work hard, yes? Yes, Papa, Rosa whispered. Miguel just stared at Eleanor with huge dark eyes. It's wonderful to meet you both, Eleanor said warmly. She crouched down to Miguel's level. I hear you like to draw, Miguel. Is that true? The boy nodded shyly. Well, we'll have drawing time in our school. Would you like that? A tiny smile appeared on Miguel's face. Next came the Smith twins, Mary and Margaret, identical girls with wild blonde curls and freckles scattered across their noses like stars. They bounded into the schoolhouse with zero shyness, their mother apologizing behind them. They're a handful, Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Smith said wearily. If they give you trouble, you have my permission to be firm. We won't give trouble, Mary, or possibly Margaret, announced. We want to learn reading. And writing, added her sister. Mama said you know everything. Not everything, Eleanor said, charmed despite herself, but I know quite a lot, and I'm very excited to share it with you. The homesteader boy, James, came next, 9 years old, thin as a rail, with serious gray eyes and a pronounced limp. His mother, a tired-looking woman in a faded dress, delivered him with obvious anxiety. James is quiet, she said. Too quiet, some say. But he's good with numbers, real good. I like numbers, James said softly. It was the first time he'd spoken. They make sense. Eleanor felt her heart squeeze. They do make sense, don't they? Much more than words sometimes. We're going to be good friends, James. The ranch hand's children came last. 3 rowdy boys aged 7, 10, and 13, sons of different families but raised together on the ranch like brothers. The oldest, Tommy, had the attitude of someone who'd already decided school was a waste of time. My pa says reading's for people who don't got real work to do, he announced, slouching against a desk. Your pa's wrong, came a voice from the doorway. Daniel stepped into the schoolhouse, and Tommy immediately straightened. Reading is for people who want to understand the world beyond what they can see from a saddle. Your pa might disagree, but I don't, and neither does Mrs. Bennett. And on this ranch, what Mrs. Bennett says goes. Yes, sir, Mr. Mercer, Tommy muttered. That's better. Daniel nodded to Eleanor. Just came to see how the introductions were going. Very well, thank you, Eleanor said, acutely aware of 8 pairs of young eyes watching this interaction with interest. She gathered the children into the semicircle of desks and sat on the edge of her desk to talk with them. She asked about their lives, their interests, what they already knew and what they wanted to learn. Rosa wanted to read English books. Miguel wanted to draw animals. The twins wanted to know everything about everything. James wanted to understand why numbers worked the way they did. The ranch boys wanted to know when they could leave. We're going to learn all of those things, Eleanor told them. Reading and writing, yes, but also science and history and mathematics. We're going to learn how to think about problems and solve them. We're going to learn that the world is much bigger and more interesting than you might imagine. How big is the world? Little Margaret asked. Eleanor smiled. So big that we could spend our whole lives learning about it and still not know everything. Isn't that exciting? No, Tommy said flatly. That's scary. Fear and excitement are often the same thing, Eleanor said. It just depends on how you look at it. After the children left, Eleanor sat alone in the schoolhouse, her mind spinning with plans. 8 children, 8 different needs, 8 different ways of learning. It was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. You look like you're planning a battle, Daniel said from the doorway. Eleanor hadn't heard him approach. "In a way, I suppose I am," she said. "A battle against ignorance, against limitation. Mind if I come in?" "Of course not." Daniel entered and leaned against one of the desks, his hat in his hands. "The children liked you. I could tell." "Even Tommy?" "Especially Tommy. He respects people who don't back down." Daniel paused. "I wanted to ask you something. What you said yesterday about us teaching each other. Did you mean it?" Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "I did." "Then I was wondering if you might be willing to teach me too. Not in the schoolhouse. I know you'll have your hands full with the children, but maybe in the evenings, if you're not too tired. I can read, like I said, but there's so much I can't. Poetry, philosophy, all those things you mentioned to Caldwell. I'd like to understand them." Eleanor looked at this man who'd saved her from humiliation, who spoke of ideas with such hunger, who treated her intelligence as something valuable rather than threatening. In Philadelphia, no man would have asked her to teach him. It would have been an admission of inferiority, an unthinkable blow to pride. But Daniel asked with simple honesty, without shame, just genuine desire to learn. "I would be honored to teach you," Eleanor said. "What would you like to start with?" "Whatever you think I should know," Daniel said. "I trust your judgment." They agreed to meet 3 evenings a week after dinner in Claire's library. Daniel would come at 7 and they would work for an hour or two, depending on his ranch schedule. That first evening, Eleanor brought down several books from her room, a volume of Emerson's essays, some Wordsworth poetry, a primer on basic philosophy. She found Daniel already in the library, freshly washed and obviously nervous, a blank notebook and pencil laid out before him like tools. "I wasn't sure what to bring," he said. "You brought the most important thing," Eleanor said, touching the notebook. "An open mind and a willingness to learn. That's all anyone needs." They started with poetry, Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, because Eleanor believed in beginning with beauty. She read it aloud first, letting the rhythms wash over them, then read it again more slowly. "I don't understand half the words," Daniel admitted. "Neither did I, the first time I heard it," Eleanor said. "Poetry isn't always about understanding every word. Sometimes it's about the feeling. What did you feel when I read it?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Longing," he said finally, "like the man in the poem is remembering something beautiful and wishing he could feel it the same way again, like time changed him." Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. "That's exactly right. That's the heart of the poem. Everything else, all the fancy words, all the complicated images, they're just trying to express that feeling." They worked through the poem line by line, Eleanor explaining references and vocabulary, Daniel taking careful notes. His handwriting was rough but legible, formed with the painstaking precision of someone who'd taught himself late. "You write beautifully," Eleanor said, watching him. Daniel looked up, surprised. "It's chicken scratch." "It's honest. Every letter is deliberate. That's beautiful." She saw color rise in his cheeks, and he bent back over his notebook. They moved on to one of Emerson's simpler essays, Self-Reliance, and Eleanor watched Daniel's face transform as he read passages aloud. His voice was good for reading, deep and clear, with a natural sense of rhythm. "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string," Daniel read, then stopped. "That's remarkable. That's exactly what Clara did when her husband died. Everyone told her to sell the ranch, that she couldn't manage it alone, but she trusted herself." "And what about you?" Eleanor asked. "Do you trust yourself?" Daniel considered this seriously. "In ranch work, yes. I know my capabilities there, but in this," he gestured to the books around them. "In the world of ideas, I feel like I'm stumbling in the dark." "Everyone stumbles in the dark at first," Eleanor said. "The key is to keep moving forward. You're doing beautifully, Daniel." Their hours stretched to 2, then 3. They talked about self-reliance and conformity, about society's expectations and individual truth. Daniel asked questions that were simple but profound, connections Eleanor had never considered. He saw the essays through the lens of his own experience, harsh winters, struggling cattle, the choice between security and principle. "You have a philosopher's mind," Eleanor told him as they finally closed the books. "You think deeply about things." I've had a lot of time to think, Daniel said. Long cattle drives, night watches. A man's mind wanders when his hands are busy. That's when the best thinking happens, Eleanor said, when you're not trying to force it. They established a pattern over the following days. Eleanor prepared for her school during the day, organized curriculum, made lesson plans. In the afternoons, she explored the ranch, walked the red mesas, watched the cattle, learned the rhythms of this new world. And in the evenings, she taught Daniel. Their lessons ranged widely. They read poetry and philosophy, discussed history and science, worked through mathematical concepts. Daniel was a quick learner, hungry for knowledge, unafraid to ask questions. He challenged her sometimes, pushed back against ideas, brought his own experience to bear on abstract concepts. "This philosophy about noble savages," he said one night reading Rousseau, "it's nonsense. I've known plenty of people who lived close to the land, including myself. We're not noble or savage, we're just people trying to survive." This writer never actually lived that life, did he? No, Eleanor admitted. He wrote from theory, not experience. Then his theory's flawed, Daniel said firmly. You can't understand a life you haven't lived. Eleanor felt her respect for him deepen. You're absolutely right. That's the danger of philosophy divorced from reality. It becomes pretty words without truth. Not all philosophy is like that, though, Daniel said. That Emerson piece about self-reliance, he understands something real. What makes you say that? Because he's writing about the struggle between what you know is right and what everyone tells you is right. That's a real struggle. I've felt it. Daniel met her eyes. You've felt it too, haven't you? Being told your education was wrong, that you should be less than you are. Eleanor felt suddenly exposed. Yes, all my life. Then Emerson's speaking truth. The best philosophy comes from people who've actually wrestled with the questions they're writing about. Their conversations often continued after the books were closed, ranging into personal territory. Daniel told her about growing up in mining camps, about his father's death in a collapse, about years of wandering before he found Red Mesa. Eleanor told him about her father's library, about the joy of learning and the pain of being told that joy was inappropriate for a woman. I don't understand that, Daniel said one evening. They were sitting in Clara's library, books scattered around them, the lamp burning low. Why would anyone want to limit another person's mind? It seems like waste, pure waste. Because knowledge is power, Eleanor said, and people who have power don't like to share it. But you sharing knowledge with me doesn't diminish you. If anything, it makes both of us stronger. You'd think society would see it that way, Eleanor said. But it doesn't. When a woman knows too much, she's threatening. When she teaches, she's overstepping. When she has opinions, she's unwomanly. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Did Caldwell make you feel unwomanly? The question was gentle but direct. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. He made me feel like a freak, she said quietly. Like something unnatural. He looked at me with disgust, Daniel. Genuine disgust because my mind worked too well. Then he's a fool who doesn't deserve another moment of your thought. Daniel's voice was fierce. There's nothing unnatural about intelligence, nothing freakish about education. Caldwell's the unnatural one, a man so insecure that a woman's knowledge threatens him. Eleanor felt something break open in her chest, a knot of shame she'd been carrying for years. I've been told all my life that I should be less, that I should hide what I know, pretend ignorance, make myself smaller so men could feel larger. That's their failure, not yours, Daniel said. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Eleanor, listen to me. In these past weeks, teaching me, you've been fully yourself. You've shared everything you know without apology, without holding back. And I don't feel smaller. I feel larger. My world has expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined. You haven't diminished me. You've elevated me. Eleanor couldn't speak. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. I'm sorry, she managed. I don't usually... Don't apologize, Daniel said. You've carried a heavy burden for a long time. It's all right to set it down. They sat in silence while Eleanor composed herself. When she finally looked up, Daniel was watching her with such warmth, such genuine care, that it made her heart ache. Thank you, she said. for seeing me, really seeing me. It's not hard to see you, Daniel said quietly. You shine. The schoolhouse opened on a crisp Monday morning in late October. Eleanor arrived early, her stomach fluttering with nerves, to find the room already warming from the stove Daniel had lit. On her desk was a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers, purple asters and golden rabbit brush, in a tin cup. No note, but she knew who'd left them. The children arrived in a cluster, scrubbed and nervous. Eleanor welcomed each one by name, showed them to their desks, and stood before them feeling the weight of their expectation. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome to our school. Before we begin, I want to tell you what we're going to do here. We're going to learn to read and write, yes. We're going to study mathematics and science and history. But more than that, we're going to learn how to think, how to ask questions and find answers, how to look at the world and understand it." "My pa says thinking too much makes your head hurt," Tommy offered. "Your pa might be right," Eleanor said, to surprised laughter. "Thinking can be hard work, but it's good work, the best kind of work. Because once you can think clearly, no one can fool you. No one can tell you lies and expect you to believe them. You become your own authority." She saw interest flicker in Rose's dark eyes, saw James sit up straighter. They started with reading, simple passages that Eleanor had written on the board, stories about ranch life and animals. The children took turns reading aloud, helping each other with difficult words. Then they copied the passages onto their slates, practicing their letters. Mathematics came next, practical problems about cattle and fences and distances. Eleanor walked among the desks, helping, encouraging, praising good thinking rather than just right answers. "James, explain how you solved that problem," she said. The quiet boy flushed. I drew a picture first, of the fence. Then I counted the sections." "That's excellent reasoning. Sometimes drawing a picture helps us see the problem more clearly." Eleanor smiled at him. "You're thinking like a mathematician." For science, they went outside to observe the natural world. Eleanor had them collect leaves and rocks, sketch what they saw, ask questions about how things worked. Miguel came alive outdoors, drawing detailed pictures of insects and birds. The twins found a lizard and wanted to know everything about it. "How does it change colors?" Mary demanded. "That's a wonderful question," Eleanor said. "Let's observe it carefully and see if we can figure it out together." History was stories. Eleanor told them about ancient Greece and Rome, about the age of exploration, about the formation of their own territory. She made it vivid and real, full of human drama and difficult choices. "Why did people explore these?" Rosa asked. "Wasn't it scary?" "Terrifying, probably," Eleanor said. "But humans are curious creatures. We want to know what's beyond the horizon. Some of you will be explorers too, in your own ways." "I want to explore numbers," James said quietly. "See how big they can go." "Then you shall," Eleanor promised. "Numbers go infinitely far. You could explore them your whole life and never reach the end." By the end of that first day, Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated. The children filed out chattering, already planning what they'd bring to show her tomorrow. Even Tommy looked less hostile, interested despite himself in a discussion they'd had about why the sky was blue. Daniel appeared as she was cleaning the slate board. "How did it go?" he asked. "Beautifully," Eleanor said. "Terrifyingly. Perfectly." She laughed. "I have no idea what I'm doing, but they don't know that." "You're doing exactly what they need," Daniel said. I could hear the excitement in their voices. Over the following weeks, the school became the center of Eleanor's life. She taught every weekday from 8 until 2, then spent afternoons preparing lessons, grading work, gathering materials. The children progressed at different rates. Rosa devoured every book Eleanor gave her. Miguel's drawings became remarkably detailed. James began working through mathematical problems that challenged even Eleanor. The twins learned to channel their energy into dramatic readings. Even Tommy softened, especially after Eleanor started including ranching knowledge in their lessons. She had him calculate cattle weights and grazing needs, read about livestock management, figure out complex practical problems. He began to see that education wasn't separate from his life. It was a tool to make that life better. Parents started visiting, curious about what their children were learning. Mrs. Martinez brought fresh tortillas to thank Eleanor for Rose's progress. Mrs. Smith admitted that the twins were reciting poetry at home. James's mother stood in the schoolhouse doorway with tears in her eyes, watching her son explain a mathematical concept to the younger children. "He never talked before," she whispered to Eleanor. "Now I can't get him to stop. He wants to tell me everything he's learned." Clara watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. "You're doing what Thomas dreamed of," she told Eleanor one evening, "making education matter out here." But it was Daniel's progress that filled Eleanor with the deepest pride. Their evening sessions had become the highlight of her day. He was reading complex texts now, writing his own responses, developing arguments and defending them. His mind was sharp and original, untainted by academic convention. One evening in late November, after they'd finished discussing John Stuart Mill's thoughts on liberty, Daniel closed the book and looked at Eleanor with unusual seriousness. "I need to tell you something," he said. "These past 2 months, learning from you, talking with you, it's changed me. I see the world differently now. I see myself differently." "How do you see yourself?" Eleanor asked quietly. "As someone with something to offer beyond physical labor. As someone whose thoughts have value." He paused. "You did that, Eleanor. You gave me that." "You always had it, Daniel. I just helped you see it." "No," he said firmly. "Don't diminish what you've done. You took a ranch hand who could barely read poetry and taught him to understand philosophy. You took someone who felt ignorant and made him feel capable. That's not small. That's everything." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "You were never ignorant. You were just uneducated. There's a profound difference." "I know that now, because you taught me." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture so unexpected that Eleanor's breath caught. "Eleanor, I want to keep learning from you, not just for a few months or a year. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I want to be worthy of you." Eleanor's heart was hammering. "Worthy? You're the most remarkable person I've ever met," Daniel said, his gray eyes holding hers. "You're brilliant and brave, and you see beauty in things most people overlook. You came to this territory with nothing, and you're building something extraordinary. And He took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor. I have been for weeks. Maybe since the day I saw you at the depot, looking lost but determined." Eleanor couldn't breathe. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such honesty, such vulnerability, such respect for who she actually was. "I'm not educated enough for you," Daniel continued. "I know that, but I'm trying to be. I want to understand the things you understand, see the world the way you see it. I want to be someone you could respect." "Daniel," Eleanor managed, her voice shaking, "I already respect you, more than almost anyone I've known. But could you love me?" The question was quiet, almost afraid. "Could someone like you love someone like me?" Eleanor thought about Caldwell, who'd wanted her to be less, about her mother's husband who'd dismissed her as inconvenient, about all the men who'd seen her intelligence as a threat or a flaw. And then she looked at Daniel Mercer, who'd asked her to teach him everything she knew, who grew larger through learning rather than feeling diminished, who saw her brilliance and wanted to rise to meet it rather than push it down. "I already do," she whispered. "I love you, Daniel. I think I have since you offered me a chance when everyone else was ready to discard me." The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise. He stood, drawing her up with him, and then his hands were framing her face with such tenderness it made her ache. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Please," Eleanor said. His kiss was gentle and sure, tasting of coffee and hope. Eleanor's hands found his shoulders, felt the solid strength of him, the reality of this man who loved her for exactly who she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Teach me everything you know," he said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "I want to spend my life learning from you, with you. I want to build something together, a home where minds matter as much as muscles, where our children can be both strong and wise." "Our children?" Eleanor felt tears rising again. "If you'll have me," Daniel said, "if you'll take a ranch foreman who's still learning which fork to use at fancy dinners." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I'll take a man who treats knowledge like treasure and isn't afraid to admit what he doesn't know. I'll take a partner who wants to grow rather than stay static. I'll take you, Daniel Mercer, exactly as you are. They stood in Clara's library, holding each other as the lamp burned low, and Eleanor felt the last of her old shame dissolve. She wasn't too educated. She wasn't too much. She was exactly enough for a man who wanted all of her, mind, heart, and soul. Outside, the Arizona night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The ranch slept, unaware that in the small circle of lamplight, two people had found what they'd been searching for all their lives. Not diminishment, but partnership. Not limitation, but expansion. Not shame, but celebration. Eleanor Whitmore had come west expecting rejection. Instead, she'd found a man who said, "Teach me," and meant, "I see you, I value you, I want you to be fully yourself." And in that moment, standing in Daniel's arms, Eleanor knew she was finally home. They told Clara the next morning over breakfast, though Eleanor suspected the older woman had known long before they spoke the words. Clara looked up from her coffee, studied their faces, the way Daniel couldn't stop glancing at Eleanor, the way Eleanor's hand kept drifting toward his across the table, and smiled that rare, transforming smile. "It's about time," she said simply. "I was beginning to think you two were going to dance around each other all winter." Daniel flushed. "We weren't dancing, exactly." "You were absolutely dancing," Clara interrupted. "All those evening study sessions, the way you both lit up when the other entered a room. If I'd had to watch much more of it, I was going to lock you both in the library until you figured it out." She raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "I'm happy for you, truly. You're well matched." "Thank you," Eleanor said, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "That means a great deal coming from you." "Just promise me one thing," Clara said, her expression turning serious. "Don't let love make you smaller, either of you. I've seen too many good partnerships turn into one person diminishing themselves for the other's comfort. Daniel, you keep learning. Eleanor, you keep teaching. Stay exactly who you are, together." "I wouldn't know how to be anything else," Eleanor said. "Good." Clara stood, gathering her dishes. "Now, I assume there will be a wedding at some point. When you're ready, we'll discuss details. Until then, Eleanor, I expect you to continue living here as my guest. Daniel, I expect you to continue sleeping in the foreman's cabin. I'm progressive, but I'm not that progressive." Daniel's flush deepened. "Yes, ma'am." After Clara left for the day's ranch business, Daniel caught Eleanor's hand. "Walk with me?" he asked, "before you have to open the school?" They walked out into the crisp December morning, their breath misting in the cold air. Daniel led her toward the red mesas, following a path worn smooth by years of use. The sun was just cresting the eastern hills, painting everything gold and pink. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they climbed, "about what marriage means, about partnership." "And what have you concluded?" Eleanor asked, breathless from the altitude and the climb. "That I want ours to be different from what most people have." He stopped at a flat outcropping that overlooked the entire valley. The ranch spread below them like a map, smoke rising from morning fires, cattle moving slowly through distant pastures. "Most marriages I've seen, the woman gives up everything. Her name, her work, her independence. She becomes an extension of her husband." "That's what society expects," Eleanor said quietly. "I don't care what society expects." Daniel turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. "Eleanor, I want you to keep teaching. I want you to keep being exactly who you are. If we have children, I want to raise them together, not leave it all to you while I work. I want us to keep learning from each other, keep growing. I want a partnership where we both get bigger, not where one of us shrinks to make room for the other." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Do you know how rare that is? How radical?" "I know it's not common, but nothing about us is common." He took both her hands in his. "You came to this territory expecting to be someone's decorative wife. Instead, you became a teacher who's changing children's lives. I was a ranch hand who thought he'd never understand poetry. Now I'm writing essays in the evenings, trying to capture what I'm learning." He paused. "We're both more than we were. I want to keep being more, together." "I want that too," Eleanor whispered. "So much." They stood on the outcropping as the sun rose higher, making plans. Daniel wanted to build them a house. Nothing grand, but solid and comfortable, with a large study where Eleanor could keep her books and he could write. Eleanor wanted to expand the school, maybe establish a small library for the ranch families. They talked about children, both wanted them, but agreed that Eleanor would continue teaching as long as she was able and willing. They discussed money, responsibilities, dreams. "I don't have much saved," Daniel admitted. "Ranch foremen don't make fortunes, but I have enough to start building a house, and Clara's offered me a small plot of land near the creek. Said it's been waiting for the right person." "I have a little money left from what Caldwell gave me," Eleanor said. "Not much, but enough to help with supplies." "We'll build it together," Daniel said. "Every nail, every board. It'll be ours." The school day that followed was difficult for Eleanor to focus on. Her mind kept drifting to Daniel, to their plans, to the future opening up before her like a book she'd never dared to read. But the children needed her attention, especially today. They were preparing for a Christmas program, and Eleanor had promised their families a demonstration of what they'd learned. "Miss Whitmore, you're smiling funny," Mary observed during mathematics. "Did something good happen?" Eleanor caught herself. "I'm just happy to be here with all of you." "You're always happy with us," Margaret added. "But today you're extra happy, like you have a secret." Out of the mouths of children, Eleanor thought. She did have a secret, though it wouldn't remain one for long. In communities like this, news traveled faster than wind. Sure enough, by the time school let out, Mrs. Martinez was waiting with a knowing smile. "I heard from Clara's housekeeper who heard from the ranch hands that congratulations are in order," she said warmly. "Mr. Mercer is a good man. You will be very happy." Word spread through the ranch and the surrounding homesteads like wildfire. By evening, when Eleanor and Daniel met in the library for their usual study session, they'd received visits from half a dozen well-wishers. Even the crusty old ranch hand who'd been skeptical about a woman teacher stopped by to offer gruff congratulations. "Mercer's lucky," he told Eleanor. "Don't let him forget it." "I won't," Eleanor promised, amused. That evening's study session was different. There was an ease between them now, an intimacy that came from acknowledged love. They sat closer than before, their hands often touching as they turned pages. Daniel was working through a collection of Thoreau's essays, and his observations were sharper than ever. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life." That's what we're doing, isn't it? Choosing what matters. "In a way," Eleanor said, though Thoreau went alone. "We're choosing to do it together." "Better than alone," Daniel said firmly. He set down the book and pulled out his notebook where he'd been writing his own thoughts. "I want to show you something. I've been working on an essay about education and opportunity." Eleanor took the notebook carefully. Daniel's handwriting had improved dramatically over the past months, the letters more confident now. She read slowly, savoring his words. He'd written about his own journey from illiteracy to learning, about the barriers that kept working people from education, about how knowledge should belong to everyone regardless of class or circumstance. It was raw and honest and deeply moving. "Daniel, this is remarkable," Eleanor said, looking up at him. "You should publish this." He laughed nervously. "Publish it? Where would I even—" "There are journals that accept essays on education and social reform. I can help you refine it, prepare it for submission." Eleanor's mind was racing. "Your perspective is valuable precisely because it's uncommon. Most people writing about education are academics who've never experienced being denied it. You've lived both sides." "I don't know if I'm ready." "You're ready," Eleanor said firmly. "And even if you weren't, you'd learn by doing. That's what you've taught me. That we learn by attempting, even when we're afraid." Daniel looked at her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "You have so much faith in me." "Because you've earned it. You've worked harder in these past months than most students work in years. You question everything, think deeply, challenge assumptions. That's what real scholarship is, Daniel. Not just memorizing facts, but genuinely engaging with ideas." They worked on the essay together, Eleanor suggesting ways to strengthen arguments, Daniel pushing back when he felt she was diluting his voice. It was collaboration of the highest order, two minds working in harmony, each making the other sharper. The section here, Eleanor said, pointing to a passage about class barriers. It's powerful, but you could make it even stronger by including a specific example. Like what? Like you. Tell the story of wanting to learn but having no access to books, no teachers. Make it personal. Daniel hesitated. Won't that seem self-indulgent? It'll seem honest. People connect with stories, with specific human experience. The abstract is important, but the particular is what makes people care. He added the story, a brief account of his father's death, his years of wandering, his hunger for knowledge he didn't know how to access. When he read it back to Eleanor, his voice rough with emotion, she had tears in her eyes. "That's it," she whispered. "That's perfect." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor prepared the children for their program while also helping Daniel polish his essay. In her spare moments, and there were precious few, she worked with Clara to plan a small wedding for the spring. Nothing elaborate, Eleanor insisted, just family and friends here at the ranch. Exactly what I would have chosen, Clara approved. Simple and real, like the two of you. The school's Christmas program took place on a cold, clear evening a week before the holiday. Families gathered in the schoolhouse, which Eleanor and the children had decorated with pine boughs and paper chains. Every desk had been pushed aside to create a performance space. The children recited poetry they'd memorized, Wordsworth and Whitman, carefully chosen to match each child's abilities. Rosa read a passage from Dickens in clear, confident English. James explained a mathematical concept using a diagram he'd drawn himself. Miguel displayed his nature drawings, each one meticulously detailed and labeled. The twins performed a dramatic reading of a historical scene, complete with costumes they'd made from old fabric. Even Tommy participated, reading an essay he'd written about modern ranching techniques. His father watched with undisguised amazement. "I didn't know the boy could write like that," he muttered to Daniel. "Your son's brilliant," Daniel said quietly. He just needed someone to show him that intelligence and ranching aren't opposites. After the program, families lingered, drinking coffee and eating cookies that Mrs. Martinez had made. Parents approached Eleanor one by one, thanking her, marveling at their children's progress. "Rosa speaks English at home now," Mrs. Martinez said, tears in her eyes. "She teaches Miguel, just like you teach her. She wants to be a teacher someday." "Then she will be," Eleanor said firmly. "She's smart and dedicated. There's no reason she can't." James's mother gripped Eleanor's hand. "You've given my boy confidence. He stands taller now, speaks up. I never thought I'd see it." Even Tommy's skeptical father approached, hat in hand. "I was wrong about school," he admitted gruffly. "The boy's learning things that'll help him run a ranch better than I do. Thank you for not giving up on him." Standing in her schoolhouse, surrounded by families whose lives she'd touched, Eleanor felt a profound sense of purpose. This was what education was meant to be. Not empty prestige or social climbing, but genuine transformation. Not making people feel small, but helping them grow. Daniel caught her eye across the room and smiled, and Eleanor felt her heart swell. This life they were building, it was everything she'd never dared to dream. Christmas itself was quiet and lovely. Clara insisted they celebrate at the ranch house, inviting several of the hands who had nowhere else to go. They shared a modest feast, roasted beef, vegetables from Clara's root cellar, pies made with dried fruit. Daniel gave Eleanor a hand-carved box for her pens and papers, the wood smooth and beautiful under her fingers. "I made it myself," he said shyly. "In the evenings, after our study sessions, I wanted you to have something made specifically for you." Eleanor gave him books, a new collection of essays, a volume of poetry, a blank journal for his own writing. "For our continued education together," she said. They walked out after dinner, just the two of them, into the cold, starlit night. Daniel pulled Eleanor close, and they stood together watching their breath mist in the air. "This time last year, I was alone," Daniel said quietly. "Working another man's ranch, sleeping in a cold bunkhouse, thinking this was all life would ever be. And now? Now I have you. I have purpose beyond just surviving. I have a future I'm excited about." He kissed her forehead. "You did that, Eleanor. You changed everything." "We changed each other," Eleanor corrected. I came here broken, convinced my education was a curse. You showed me it was a gift. The new year brought new challenges and new joys. Eleanor's school continued to thrive with 2 more families requesting to send their children. Daniel's essay was finished and mailed to 3 different journals, though they tried not to hope too much for acceptance. They began clearing the land where their house would stand, working together on cold January weekends to mark out the foundation. I want the study to face east, Eleanor said, standing in ankle-deep snow, so the morning light comes in. Then that's where it'll be, Daniel promised, but their happiness was not without complications. In late January, a visitor arrived at Mesa Ranch who would test everything they'd built. Eleanor was teaching when she saw a familiar carriage pull up outside. Her stomach dropped when Victor Caldwell stepped out, as impeccably dressed as ever, his expression calculating. She dismissed the children early, her hands trembling slightly, and went to meet him. "Mr. Caldwell," she said coolly, "what brings you to Red Mesa?" "Business with Clara Bennett," he said, but his eyes were assessing Eleanor in that old, dismissive way. "And curiosity. I heard you'd landed on your feet, teaching of all things." "Yes, teaching of all things." "How quaint." Caldwell's tone was condescending. "Playing schoolmarm to ranch children. Quite a come-down from being my wife." Eleanor felt anger flare in her chest. "Being your wife would have been the come-down, Mr. Caldwell. Teaching these children is the most meaningful work I've ever done." "Meaningful," he laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Is that what you tell yourself? That wasting your education on children who'll never amount to anything is meaningful?" "These children will amount to a great deal," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury. "They're learning to think, to question, to grow. They're becoming exactly who they're meant to be, without anyone telling them they're too much or not enough." "Still defending your excessive education, I see." Caldwell shook his head. "I came to offer you another chance, actually. I've reconsidered my position." Eleanor stared at him. "What?" "I've decided I could tolerate your intellectual pretensions, provided you kept them private. I'm prepared to renew my offer of marriage." He said it as if conferring a great favor. "You'd have security, status, comfort. All you'd have to do is give up this teaching nonsense and accept your proper place." For a moment, Eleanor was too stunned to speak. Then she began to laugh, a genuine, incredulous laugh that came from deep in her belly. "You think I would give up everything I've built here? Everything I am? For the privilege of being your decorative wife?" "What have you built?" Caldwell gestured around dismissively. "A one-room schoolhouse in the middle of nowhere. A handful of students who will forget everything you teach them the moment they're old enough to work full-time. You're wasting yourself, Eleanor." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I was wasting myself trying to be what men like you wanted. Here, I'm finally whole." "Here, you're engaged to a ranch foreman," Caldwell said, and Eleanor realized he'd done his research. "A man who can barely read, who has nothing to offer you intellectually. Do you really think you'll be happy with someone so beneath you?" Eleanor saw red. Daniel Mercer is the finest man I've ever known. He's intelligent, thoughtful, curious, and brave enough to admit what he doesn't know. He treats learning like treasure and treats me like an equal. You couldn't understand that if you tried." "An equal?" Caldwell's voice dripped with scorn. "A ranch hand is your equal? You've lowered your standards dramatically." "I've raised them," Eleanor shot back. "I've chosen a partner who wants me to be fully myself, not someone who wants me to shrink to fit his insecurity. Daniel asked me to teach him everything I know. You wanted me to pretend I knew nothing. There's your difference." "And when the novelty wears off," Caldwell pressed, "when he realizes he can never truly match your education, your breeding, your background, what then?" "Then we'll still have respect, partnership, and genuine love. More than you'll ever understand." Caldwell's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." "The only mistake I made was answering your advertisement in the first place," Eleanor said. "Now please leave. You have no business here." She turned and walked back to the schoolhouse, her whole body shaking with anger and adrenaline. Through the window, she watched Caldwell speak briefly with Clara, some legitimate ranch business, apparently, before climbing back into his carriage and leaving. Clara found Eleanor in the schoolhouse a few minutes later, sitting at her desk and trying to calm her racing heart. I saw him talking to you, Clara said. What did that pompous fool want? Eleanor told her everything, the renewed proposal, the insults to Daniel, the dismissal of her work. Clara's face grew progressively darker. He actually said the children would never amount to anything? Clara's voice was deadly quiet. Among other things, yes. That man wouldn't recognize value if it hit him in the face. Clara sat down heavily. Are you all right? I'm angry, Eleanor admitted, and shaken, but also... She paused, searching for the right word. Certain. Seeing him again, hearing what he thinks of me, of Daniel, of this life, it made me realize how far I've come, how much I've changed. You haven't changed, Clara said gently. You've just stopped pretending to be less than you are. Eleanor looked at her friend and mentor, this woman who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Thank you, she said, for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me. You made it easy, Clara said. You walked in here educated and scared and turned into someone confident and purposeful. That's all you, Eleanor. I just provided the space. That evening, Eleanor told Daniel about Caldwell's visit. They were in the library, but neither of them could focus on books. Daniel listened in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He said I was beneath you, he said finally. Not a question, just a flat statement. He's a fool who measures worth in all the wrong ways, Eleanor said fiercely. Daniel, look at me. He met her eyes, and she saw the old insecurity there, the fear that maybe Caldwell was right, that a ranch foreman couldn't be enough for an educated woman. You are not beneath me, Eleanor said, taking his face in her hands. You are beside me. That's what matters. We stand together, equal in the ways that count. But he's not entirely wrong, Daniel said quietly. I don't have your education, your background. Stop. Eleanor's voice was sharp. You're doing exactly what he wants, doubting yourself, doubting us. Don't give him that power. I just wonder sometimes if you wouldn't be better with someone more what? More pompous? More insecure? More willing to make me smaller so he can feel larger? Eleanor felt tears threatening. Daniel, you asked me to teach you everything I know. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? How rare? It's just learning. It's trust. It's humility. It's genuine partnership. Eleanor gripped his hands. Most men would rather pretend to know everything than admit ignorance. You'd rather learn. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's strength. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I love you, he said into her hair. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. I love you too, Eleanor whispered. And I choose you. Every day I choose you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're perfect for me. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Eleanor felt her certainty return. Caldwell's words didn't matter. Society's expectations didn't matter. All that mattered was this. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who made each other better, who were building something real and lasting. The next week brought news that pushed Caldwell's visit into memory. Daniel's essay had been accepted for publication in a regional journal focused on education reform. The editor's letter praised his unique perspective and powerful prose and asked for more submissions. Daniel stared at the letter in disbelief. They want to publish it. They actually want to publish my writing. Of course they do, Eleanor said, though she was crying with joy. You're a talented writer with important things to say. I'm a ranch foreman who learned to read poetry 6 months ago. You're a thinker who happens to work as a ranch foreman, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference. The publication brought unexpected consequences. Other journals began requesting essays. Teachers from other territories wrote, asking about his educational philosophy. An academic from California wanted to visit Red Mesa to observe their innovative approach to frontier education. This is getting out of hand, Daniel said one evening, overwhelmed by correspondence. This is your voice mattering, Eleanor countered. People need to hear what you have to say about education and opportunity. You're living proof that intelligence isn't about class or formal schooling. It's about curiosity and dedication. As winter gave way to early spring, they finalized plans for their wedding. It would be simple, Held at the ranch in late April with just close friends and the school families. Eleanor would wear a practical dress she could use afterward, not an expensive gown worn only once. Daniel would wear his best suit, still worn at the elbows, but clean and pressed. "I wish your father could be here," Daniel said one evening as they discussed details. Eleanor felt the familiar ache of loss. "I do too. He would have loved you, loved seeing me this happy." "Tell me about him," Daniel said. "I want to know the man who raised you to be so remarkable." So Eleanor told him stories late into the night about her father's library, his unconventional teaching methods, his belief that education should free people rather than limit them. And Daniel listened with that intense focus he brought to everything, asking questions, making connections. "He sounds like he was ahead of his time," Daniel said. He was. It made his life difficult. Other academics looked down on him for teaching a daughter as he would a son. "Then he and I have something in common," Daniel said quietly. "Being looked down on for refusing to accept artificial limitations." Eleanor kissed him softly. "You would have liked each other very much." 2 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor's school held its spring examination, a chance for the children to demonstrate their progress to their families and to Clara. The children had been preparing for weeks, nervous and excited in equal measure. The examination was held on a warm April afternoon. Families crowded into the schoolhouse. One by one, the children presented what they'd learned. Rosa read a complex passage in English and explained its meaning. Miguel presented his nature journal, now filled with dozens of detailed drawings. James solved advanced mathematical problems on the slate board, explaining his reasoning. The twins performed a scene from Shakespeare, their dramatic flair perfectly suited to the material. And Tommy, the boy who'd once insisted reading was useless, stood before his father and read an essay he'd written about the future of ranching, incorporating scientific principles, economic theory, and practical experience into a sophisticated argument. His father wept openly. After the examination, as families celebrated their children's achievements, Clara pulled Eleanor aside. "You've done something extraordinary here," she said. "These children don't just know more. They think differently. They question, analyze, create. That's real education." "They did the work," Eleanor said. "I just gave them the tools." "You gave them more than tools. You gave them permission to be intelligent, to be curious, to be themselves." Clara smiled. "That's the greatest gift a teacher can give." That night, Eleanor and Daniel walked to the site where their house was being built. The foundation was laid, the frame beginning to rise. In another month, it would be finished. Their home, built with their own hands and the help of ranch workers who'd donated time. They stood in what would be their study, looking up at the open sky visible through the framing. "Can you imagine?" Eleanor said softly. 6 months ago, I was stepping off a stage in Redemption Creek, convinced I had nothing. And now you have everything," Daniel finished. "We have everything." "Not everything," Eleanor said. "Not yet. But we're building it. Together." Daniel pulled her close, and they stood in the skeleton of their future home, surrounded by the vast Arizona night, two people who'd found partnership in the most unlikely of places. The woman who'd been called too educated, and the man who'd asked to learn everything she knew. Together, they were creating something beautiful, not despite their differences, but because of them. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind whispered through the frame of their rising home, Eleanor felt certain of one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, the kind of Arizona spring morning that made the harsh territory seem almost gentle. Eleanor woke in her room at Clara's house for the last time as an unmarried woman, listening to birds singing outside her window and feeling a peace so profound it nearly brought tears. Clara knocked softly and entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing an expression Eleanor had learned meant the older woman was feeling emotional, but trying to hide it. "Last morning as Miss Whitmore," Clara said, setting the coffee on the bedside table. "How do you feel?" "Ready," Eleanor said simply. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." "No doubts? No cold feet?" "None." Eleanor sat up, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Clara, I know it's unconventional, marrying a ranch foreman, staying here instead of going back east, continuing to teach, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Good," Clara said, sitting on the edge of the bed, because I have something to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from gossip. She paused, choosing her words carefully. There are people in Redemption Creek who think you're making a mistake, who think Daniel's marrying above his station and you're marrying beneath yours. Eleanor felt anger flare, but Clara held up a hand. Let them talk, Claire continued. They don't understand what you two have built. They measure worth in money and status, not in character and partnership. But I want you to know that talk exists, so you're prepared for it. Let them say whatever they want, Eleanor said firmly. Their opinions don't change what Daniel and I know to be true. That's exactly the right attitude. Clara smiled. Your father would be proud of you, Eleanor. The way you've claimed your life refused to be diminished. He raised a fighter. He raised someone who believes intelligence and love aren't mutually exclusive, Eleanor said. That's what he gave me, the belief that I could have both. The ceremony was planned for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the meadow between the main house and the half-built home that would soon be theirs. Eleanor dressed simply in a dress of deep blue cotton, practical enough for ranch life, but beautiful in its simplicity. She wore her mother's pearls, the only jewelry she'd kept, and pinned her auburn hair up with wildflowers the Smith twins had gathered. When she came downstairs, she found the ranch transformed. Someone, probably Daniel, with help from the hands, had strung paper lanterns between posts driven into the ground. Simple wooden benches faced a small arbor covered in pine boughs and early wildflowers. It wasn't elegant or refined, but it was honest and beautiful, and perfectly them. The guests were already gathering, ranch families, homesteaders from neighboring properties, a few people from town who'd come to respect Eleanor's work. Mrs. Martinez had brought food, Mrs. Smith had baked a cake, and even Tommy's skeptical father had arrived with his wife and children, dressed in their Sunday best. Daniel stood near the arbor with Clara, who'd agreed to officiate. He wore a dark suit that Eleanor had never seen before, probably borrowed, and his hair was slicked back with water. When he saw Eleanor approaching on the arm of Clara's oldest ranch hand, who'd volunteered to give her away, his face transformed with such joy that several people in the crowd sighed audibly. Eleanor walked toward him across the spring grass, her heart hammering not with nervousness but with anticipation. This was it. The moment when she chose her future, when she claimed the life she wanted rather than the life society expected. When she reached Daniel's side, he took her hands and whispered, "You're beautiful." "So are you," she whispered back, and meant it. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but beautiful in his honesty, his openness, his absolute certainty that this was right. Clara cleared her throat, and the crowd quieted. "We're gathered here today," she began, "to witness the marriage of Eleanor Whitmore and Daniel Mercer. I've known both of these people for less than a year, but in that time I've watched them transform each other and themselves. Eleanor came to us educated but wounded, brilliant but convinced her brilliance was a curse. Daniel was capable but convinced his lack of formal education limited what he could become." Eleanor saw Daniel's hand tighten on hers. "Together," Clara continued, "they've proven that the best partnerships aren't about two people being the same. They're about two people making each other bigger." Eleanor taught Daniel that knowledge is accessible to anyone willing to work for it. Daniel taught Eleanor that intelligence without compassion is empty, and that the most important education happens when we're brave enough to be vulnerable. Eleanor felt tears beginning to slide down her cheeks. "Marriage," Clara said, looking between them, "is a partnership. Not ownership, not diminishment, but true partnership. These two understand that. They've built something rare, a relationship based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and the courage to keep growing together. So when I ask if they're ready to commit to each other, I'm not asking if they're ready to stay the same. I'm asking if they're ready to keep changing, keep learning, keep becoming more than they are today." She turned to Daniel. "Daniel Mercer, do you promise to partner with Eleanor Whitmore, to respect her mind, honor her strength, and support her growth? To be willing to learn from her and teach her in return? To build a life where both of you can flourish?" "I do," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear. "I promise all of that and more. I promise to never ask her to be less than she is, to celebrate her brilliance instead of fearing it, and to love her exactly as she is while supporting who she's becoming." Clara turned to Eleanor. Eleanor Whitmore, do you promise to partner with Daniel Mercer? To respect his journey, honor his wisdom, and support his growth? To be willing to teach him and learn from him in return? To build a life where both of you can flourish? I do, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. I promise all of that and more. I promise to never make him feel less than he is, to value his intelligence in all its forms, and to love him exactly as he is while supporting who he's becoming. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, Clara said with a smile, and more importantly by the authority vested in me by common sense and genuine affection for you both, I declare you married. Daniel, kiss your wife. Daniel pulled Eleanor close and kissed her softly, thoroughly, while the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Eleanor kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and his, feeling the solid reality of this moment, this choice, this future. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying, the world seemed brighter. Eleanor looked out at the gathered crowd, at the children she taught, at the families who'd welcomed her, at Clara who'd given her a chance, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The celebration that followed was simple and joyful. They ate Mrs. Martinez's tamales and Mrs. Smith's cake, drank Clara's special occasion wine, and danced to music from a fiddle player one of the hands knew. Eleanor danced with Daniel, then with James, who was shy but determined, then with both Smith twins at once, who made her dizzy with their enthusiasm. As the sun set and the paper lanterns were lit, Daniel pulled Eleanor away from the party, leading her toward their half-finished house. I want to show you something, he said. They walked through the frame of what would be their home, Daniel lighting a lamp he'd left there earlier. In what would be their study, he'd set up a makeshift desk, just boards across sawhorses, and on it lay a thick sheaf of papers. What's this? Eleanor asked. I've been writing, Daniel said quietly. Every night after you went to sleep, every spare moment. It's an essay, or maybe the beginning of a book, about education and class and opportunity, about what it means to learn as an adult, to discover that intelligence isn't fixed or limited by circumstance. Eleanor picked up the pages carefully, scanning the first few. Daniel's words leaped off the page, honest, powerful, deeply observed. Daniel, this is extraordinary, she breathed. How long have you been working on this? 3 months? Maybe 4. He looked almost embarrassed. I wanted to give you something on our wedding day, not just a ring or some object, but proof that what you've given me matters, that teaching me changed my life. Eleanor set down the papers and took his face in her hands. You don't have to prove anything to me. I already know what we have is real. I know, Daniel said. But I wanted to prove it to myself. That I'm not just playing at being educated, that I've actually become someone who can contribute to important conversations. He paused. The journal that published my first essay wants this when it's finished. They want to serialize it over several months. Oh, Daniel. Eleanor felt pride surge through her. That's incredible. It's because of you, he said. All of it. You saw something in me I didn't see in myself. No, Eleanor said firmly. I saw what was already there. You did the work, Daniel. You chose to learn, chose to grow, chose to become more than you were. I just held the door open. You're the one who walked through it. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Eleanor felt the future stretching out before them, bright and uncertain and full of possibility. They returned to the party as the moon rose, and Clara immediately cornered them. I have a wedding gift for you, she said, pressing an envelope into Eleanor's hands. Don't open it now. Wait until later. That night, in the room at Clara's house that was temporarily theirs until their home was finished, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a deed to 10 acres of land adjacent to their house plot and a letter. Eleanor and Daniel, Clara had written in her bold hand, this land is yours. Build your school on it. Build your library. Build whatever you dream of building. You've shown me that education isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. That knowledge should be accessible to everyone, regardless of class or circumstance. Take this land and use it to keep changing lives. With deep affection and respect, Clara. Eleanor read the letter aloud to Daniel, her voice breaking. 10 acres. Enough for a real school building, a proper library, maybe even small houses for visiting teachers someday. She's giving us the means to build something permanent, Daniel said wonderingly, something that will outlast us. We'll make it count, Eleanor promised. Every acre, every building, every student. The next months were a whirlwind of building and planning. Their house was completed by midsummer, a modest but solid structure with large windows, good light, and the spacious study they'd dreamed of. Eleanor moved her books in first, arranging them on shelves Daniel had built himself. They filled the study with everything they'd accumulated: her father's old volumes, new books they'd ordered, Daniel's growing collection of notebooks filled with his own writing. "This is my favorite room in any house I've ever seen," Daniel said, watching Eleanor arrange her books with the care some people reserve for fine china. "It's our room," Eleanor corrected. "Our minds, our work, our growth, all here together." They fell into a rhythm of married life that felt natural and right. Eleanor continued teaching, her school now bursting with 15 students as word spread of her methods. Daniel managed the ranch during the day and wrote in the evenings, his essays growing more sophisticated and widely read. Journals from across the territory and beyond began requesting his work, drawn by his unique perspective on education and social mobility. In the evenings, they still studied together, but now it was more balanced. Daniel introduced Eleanor to practical sciences she'd never studied: geology, botany, animal husbandry. Eleanor guided him through philosophy and literature. They pushed each other, challenged each other, made each other think in new ways. "You're teaching me to see beauty in things I took for granted," Eleanor told him one evening as they examined rock formations near the Red Mesas. "I was so focused on books that I missed the education available in the natural world." "And you're teaching me to think abstractly," Daniel countered, "to see patterns and principles beyond immediate experience. We're completing each other's education." Their partnership became a model for others on the ranch. Young couples saw how Eleanor and Daniel worked together, respected each other, celebrated each other's achievements, and began questioning the traditional power dynamics in their own relationships. Mrs. Martinez confided to Eleanor that she'd started teaching her husband to read at night, inspired by what she'd seen. "He was ashamed at first," she said, "but I told him, if Mr. Mercer can learn, so can he. Now he reads to the children before bed. It's brought us closer." Eleanor's school continued to evolve. She introduced new subjects: basic sciences, critical thinking, even some philosophy adapted for young minds. She encouraged the children to question everything, to think for themselves, to challenge assumptions. This didn't always make her popular. One parent complained that his daughter had started questioning his decisions at home. "That's exactly what she should do," Eleanor told him calmly. "She should understand the reasoning behind rules, not just follow them blindly. She's learning to think, which will serve her well throughout her life." "But she's a girl," the man protested. "She doesn't need to think that much. She just needs to learn enough to manage a household." "Your daughter," Eleanor said, her voice steel beneath the politeness, "is brilliant. She has a gift for mathematics that I've rarely seen. She could become an accountant, an engineer, a scientist. Are you really going to limit her because of her gender?" The man left angry, but his daughter stayed in school, and 2 months later he came back to apologize. "She explained compound interest to me," he said wonderingly, "better than the banker in town. Made me see I was getting cheated on a loan. You're right, she's brilliant. I was a fool to try to limit that." In the fall, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening in their study, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Daniel's expression moved through surprise to joy to concern in rapid succession. "Are you happy about this?" he asked carefully. "I know you love teaching." "I'm ecstatic," Eleanor said. "And yes, I'll keep teaching as long as I'm able. We talked about this, remember? Children don't mean I stop being who I am." "I know," Daniel said, pulling her close. "I just want to make sure you're not feeling pressured to give anything up." "The only thing I'm giving up is the illusion that I have to choose between motherhood and meaningful work," Eleanor said. "Other women have managed both, so will I." She taught through her 6th month until the physical demands became too much. Rosa, now 11 and Eleanor's star pupil, helped with the younger children during those last weeks. When Eleanor finally took leave, She left detailed lesson plans and Rosa in charge under Clara's supervision. "You're ready for this," Eleanor told the girl. "You've been learning how to teach by watching me teach. Now it's your turn to practice." Rosa's eyes shone. "I won't let you down, Miss Eleanor." "Mrs. Mercer now," Eleanor corrected with a smile. "And I know you won't." Their daughter was born in March of 1885, in the bedroom of their little house with Clara and a midwife from town attending. It was a difficult birth. Eleanor labored for nearly 20 hours, but when she finally held her daughter, a tiny thing with Daniel's gray eyes and a surprising amount of dark hair, everything else faded away. "She's perfect," Daniel whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with his work-roughened finger. "She's ours," Eleanor said, marveling. They named her Margaret Clara. Margaret for Eleanor's mother, Clara for the woman who'd given them both a chance. Little Maggie, as she quickly became known, transformed their lives in ways both expected and surprising. Eleanor had anticipated the sleepless nights, the constant care, the physical demands of nursing. What she hadn't anticipated was the fierce intellectual curiosity motherhood sparked in her. She found herself reading about child development, educational philosophy, the science of learning. She took detailed notes on Maggie's development, fascinated by how an infant's mind began to make sense of the world. "You're studying our daughter like she's a scientific subject," Daniel observed one evening, watching Eleanor write in her journal. "She is a scientific subject," Eleanor said. "Every child is. The way they learn, the way they develop, it's extraordinary. I'm learning things about education by watching her that I never learned from books." When Maggie was 3 months old, Eleanor began bringing her to the schoolhouse. She set up a cradle in the corner and taught with her daughter nearby, nursing her during lunch break, letting the older girls help care for her during free time. "Babies don't belong in schools," one parent complained. "Why not?" Eleanor asked. "Maggie's learning by being here. She hears language, sees social interaction, experiences a community of learning, and my students are learning responsibility and gentleness by helping care for her. Everyone benefits." Daniel supported her completely, taking over evening care so Eleanor could rest or prepare lessons. He'd walk Maggie around their property, talking to her about plants and animals, pointing out stars and rock formations. "She's too young to understand," Eleanor said, watching them one evening through the window. "She's never too young to hear words and wonder," Daniel countered. "You taught me that. Every conversation, every observation, it's all building her mind, even if she can't talk back yet." When Maggie was 6 months old, Daniel's writing project was accepted for publication as a book. From Ignorance to Understanding, One Man's Journey Through Adult Education would be released by a prominent Eastern publisher the following spring. The acceptance letter praised his work as a vital contribution to the conversation about education and social mobility, written with rare honesty and insight. It included a modest advance, enough for Daniel to buy more books, to perhaps travel east for a brief lecture tour the publisher wanted to arrange. "A lecture tour," Daniel said, staring at the letter in disbelief. "They want me to talk to people about education. Me, a ranch foreman who taught himself to read philosophy." "A published author," Eleanor corrected. "A thinker and writer who has important things to say. Of course they want to hear from you." The tour was scheduled for the following autumn, a month-long circuit through Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Chicago. Eleanor insisted Daniel go, even though it meant being separated. "This is important," she said. "Your voice matters. People need to hear that education isn't limited to the wealthy or the formally schooled." "Come with me," Daniel pleaded. "Bring Maggie. We'll make it a family journey." But Eleanor was pregnant again, a surprise that had come quickly after Maggie. This pregnancy was easier than the first, but she didn't feel up to traveling. "Go," she insisted. "Speak your truth. I'll be here when you return, along with your daughter and possibly your second child if you dawdle too long." So Daniel went east in September, leaving with reluctance and returning 6 weeks later transformed. He'd spoken to packed halls, been interviewed by newspapers, met with educational reformers and politicians. His book was selling well, inspiring discussion and debate. "They called me an expert," he told Eleanor and Clara over dinner his first night back. "An expert on adult education. Me." "You are an expert," Eleanor said firmly. You've lived it, studied it, thought deeply about it. That makes you more expert than most academics who just theorize. There's talk of establishing adult education programs based on your principles, Clara added. Schools for working people, evening classes. The things you wrote about are resonating. Daniel looked overwhelmed. I just wanted to tell my story. I didn't expect to start a movement. That's how movements start, Eleanor said. One person telling the truth, and others recognizing themselves in that truth. Their second child, a son they named Thomas after Clara's late husband, was born in February of 1886. He was bigger than Maggie had been, with Eleanor's auburn hair and a serious expression that made everyone laugh. He looks like he's contemplating philosophy, Daniel said, studying his newborn son. Give him time, Eleanor said. He'll get there. With 2 children under 2 years old, life became more complex. Eleanor reduced her teaching schedule, working half days while Rosa and another older student managed the school in the afternoons. Daniel cut back on ranch work to help more at home, and Clara proved to be a doting honorary grandmother. I never had children, Clara confided to Eleanor one afternoon, holding baby Thomas while Eleanor prepared a lesson. Thomas and I wanted them, but it never happened. These 2 feel like the grandchildren I never had. They're lucky to have you, Eleanor said warmly. We all are. As Maggie grew from infant to toddler, her personality emerged, curious, determined, verbal, far earlier than expected. She followed Eleanor around the schoolhouse, mimicking her mother's teaching, lining up her dolls and reading to them from books she couldn't actually read yet. She's going to be just like you, Daniel observed fondly. She's going to be herself, Eleanor corrected. Maybe that includes teaching. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, we'll support her. By the time Thomas was walking and Maggie was 4, the school Eleanor had started in that one-room building had expanded dramatically. Using Clara's gifted land, they'd built a larger schoolhouse with 2 classrooms, a small library building, and a residence for a second teacher they'd hired. A young woman from California who'd read Daniel's book and wanted to be part of what they were building. The school now served 30 children from across the territory, ranging in age from 5 to 15. Rosa, now 17, helped teach the youngest ones while pursuing her own advanced studies with Eleanor. She'd announced her intention to become a teacher herself, maybe start schools in other remote areas. You've changed my life, Miss Eleanor, Rosa said one afternoon. They still used the old form of address, though Eleanor was long since married. Before you came, I thought I'd just grow up to marry and have babies. Now I know I can do anything. You always could, Eleanor said gently. I just helped you see it. No, Rosa said firmly. You showed me it was possible. You taught me to read and think and question. You made me believe I mattered. That's not small, Miss Eleanor. That's everything. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was why she taught, not for recognition or status, but for moments like this, for students who discovered their own capability and claimed their futures. Daniel's second book was published that fall, a more academic work on educational philosophy and practice. It was reviewed positively in major newspapers and journals, establishing him as a serious thinker in educational reform circles. Offers came for university lectures, consultancies, even a teaching position at a college in Boston. They discussed the Boston offer seriously, sitting in their study while the children slept. It would mean security, Daniel said, a steady salary, prestige, opportunities for both of us. And it would mean leaving Red Mesa, Eleanor countered. Leaving Clara, leaving the school we've built, leaving the community we're part of. Is that enough reason to stay? Daniel asked. We could build new communities, start new schools. Eleanor thought about this carefully. We could, but we've planted something real here. The school is thriving. Your writing is reaching people. Our children are growing up in a place that values both strength and intelligence. Why would we leave that to chase prestige? You don't feel limited here? Daniel pressed. Don't wish for more intellectual stimulation, more cultural opportunities? I feel challenged here every single day, Eleanor said honestly. My students push me to be creative, to adapt, to think in new ways. Your work inspires me. Clara's wisdom grounds me. And beyond that, I get to watch education transform lives in real time. That's worth more than any Boston salon. They declined the Boston offer and stayed at Red Mesa, a decision that puzzled some but felt absolutely right to them. They belonged here, in this harsh, beautiful territory, building something that mattered. As their children grew, Maggie into a bright, questioning 5-year-old, Thomas into a thoughtful 3-year-old, Eleanor and Daniel maintained their evening study sessions. Now they often included the children, reading to them, answering their endless questions, nurturing their natural curiosity. "Why is the sky blue?" Maggie asked one evening. Instead of simply answering, Eleanor asked, "What do you think?" "Maybe it's reflecting the water," Maggie guessed. "That's good thinking," Daniel said. "That's a hypothesis. Now, how could we test if that's true?" They spent the next hour exploring the question together, looking at clear sky and cloudy sky, discussing light and color, encouraging Maggie to observe and reason. "This is how we should teach," Eleanor said to Daniel later. "Not by giving answers, but by nurturing curiosity. Teaching children how to think, not what to think." "That's what you've always done," Daniel said. "It's why your students don't just learn facts. They learn to be learners." One evening in late spring, 7 years after Eleanor had first arrived in Arizona territory, she and Daniel sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the red mesas. Maggie was reading in her room, Thomas was playing with wooden blocks, and the world felt peaceful and right. "Do you ever think about Caldwell?" Daniel asked suddenly. "About what your life would have been if you'd married him?" Eleanor considered this. "Sometimes, but not with regret, with horror. I would have been trapped, Daniel, pretending to be less than I am, hiding my thoughts, performing a role. It would have killed something essential in me." "And instead you came here and became fully yourself," Daniel said. "We both did," Eleanor corrected. "You were trapped too, in your own way. Convinced you couldn't learn, couldn't grow, couldn't contribute beyond physical labor." "And you asked me what I wanted to know," Daniel said softly. "That changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the colors shift across the sky, gold to pink to deep red to purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, one of the ranch hands was singing in Spanish. Inside their house, their children played, and on the shelf in their study sat books they'd read together, essays Daniel had written, lesson plans Eleanor had crafted. "We did it," Eleanor said quietly. "We built the life we wanted, together." "We did," Daniel agreed. "And we're not done yet. There's still so much to learn, so much to build, so much to become." Eleanor looked at her husband, this man who'd saved her from humiliation and despair, who'd asked her to teach him everything she knew, who'd grown into a published author and respected thinker without ever losing his fundamental humility and kindness. "I love you," she said, "more now than even on our wedding day." "Because we've grown together," Daniel said, "because we've kept the promises we made, to partner, to respect, to elevate each other." As night fell and the first stars appeared, they went inside to their children, to their books, to their life. A life Eleanor had never imagined when she stepped off that dusty stagecoach 7 years ago. A life built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the revolutionary belief that intelligence and love weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. And in the morning, Eleanor would return to her schoolhouse, Daniel would return to his writing, and together they would continue the work they'd begun, proving that education belonged to everyone, that growth was always possible, and that the best partnerships made both people larger, never smaller. The woman who'd been called too educated and the man who'd asked to learn everything she knew had found what they'd been searching for all their lives. Not perfection, but purpose. Not ease, but meaning. Not limitation, but endless possibility. And that, Eleanor thought as she kissed her children goodnight and settled into the study beside her husband, was more than enough. It was everything. The years unfolded like pages in a book that kept getting better with each chapter. By 1890, Eleanor and Daniel's school had become something neither of them could have imagined in those early days. A true academy that drew students from across Arizona territory and beyond. The original one-room schoolhouse now stood as a monument to humble beginnings, preserved at Eleanor's insistence, while around it had grown a campus of 3 substantial buildings, a library that housed over 2,000 volumes, and dormitories for students who came from too far to travel daily. Maggie was 10 now, brilliant and headstrong, reading at a level far beyond her years. She'd announced at breakfast one morning that she wanted to study medicine, specifically the diseases that affected cattle and horses, because someone needs to understand why animals get sick, Papa, and I'm going to be that someone. Thomas, at 8, was quieter but equally determined. He spent hours drawing detailed maps of the ranch lands, calculating distances and elevations, creating topographical representations that impressed even the surveyors who occasionally passed through. He thinks like an engineer, Daniel told Eleanor one evening, studying Thomas's latest creation. See how he's marked where water flows, where erosion happens? He's understanding the land in a way I never did. He gets that from you, Eleanor said. That careful observation, that attention to how things actually work rather than how they're supposed to work. Their third child, Sarah, born when Eleanor was 31, was only 4 but already showing signs of her own unique temperament. She was the artist of the family, seeing beauty in everything, constantly creating, drawing, painting, sculpting with mud and clay. Where Maggie demanded explanations and Thomas sought patterns, Sarah simply marveled. Why does she need to know why the sunset is beautiful? Sarah had asked Eleanor recently when her older sister tried to explain the science of light refraction. Can't it just be beautiful? Both are true, Eleanor had told her gently. Understanding why something is beautiful doesn't make it less beautiful. But feeling its beauty without understanding is also valuable. You see with your heart, sweetheart. That's a gift. Rosa had indeed become a teacher, running a small school in a settlement 30 miles south. She visited twice a year, bringing her own students to interact with Eleanor's, sharing curriculum ideas and teaching methods. She'd married a quiet rancher who supported her work completely, and they had a daughter Rosa was raising to be as fierce and educated as Miss Eleanor made me. The school's reputation had spread far beyond the territory. Daniel's books, he'd published 4 now, each more influential than the last, had brought attention to their educational philosophy. Teachers came from as far as Boston and San Francisco to observe their methods. Universities invited Eleanor to speak, though she rarely accepted, preferring to stay close to her students and her family. You could be famous, Clara told her one afternoon. They were in their 60s now, Clara still spry but moving more slowly, still managing the ranch but delegating more to Daniel, who'd become as much partner as foreman. I'd rather be effective, Eleanor replied. Fame is about being seen. I'd rather see my students grow, see education transform lives, see our children become whoever they're meant to be. But fame found them anyway, or at least recognition. The territorial governor visited in the spring of 1891, making a special trip to see the school that was pioneering new approaches to frontier education. He sat in on classes, watched Maggie lead a discussion about botany with students twice her age, observed Thomas teaching younger children basic surveying techniques. This is remarkable, the governor said to Eleanor and Daniel over dinner at their home that evening. You've created something that challenges every assumption about what's possible in remote areas. Your students are as well educated as any I've seen in eastern cities. Better educated in some ways, Daniel said quietly, because they're learning to think, not just memorize. They're learning to solve problems, not just follow procedures. Your books have made quite an impact, Mr. Mercer, the governor continued. There's serious discussion in the territorial legislature about establishing adult education programs based on your principles, evening schools for working people, vocational training combined with classical education. Daniel glanced at Eleanor, and she saw the wonder in his eyes that still appeared whenever his work was recognized. Even after years of success, he never quite believed he deserved it. That would be extraordinary, Eleanor said. Education shouldn't be limited to children or to people with leisure time. Everyone should have access to learning throughout their lives. You two are proof of that, the governor said. Mr. Mercer, you've become one of the territory's most respected thinkers, and you started learning as an adult. Mrs. Mercer, you've transformed education in this region despite having no formal teaching credentials. You've shown what's possible when we stop limiting people based on arbitrary rules. After he left, Eleanor and Daniel sat in their study, the room that had been the heart of their intellectual life for over a decade. The walls were lined with books they'd collected together, shelves filled with Daniel's published essays and Eleanor's curriculum materials, their children's artwork, and early writing attempts. Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? Daniel asked. If I hadn't been at the depot that day? If I hadn't heard you with Caldwell? I try not to, Eleanor admitted. It's too frightening. I might have gotten back on that eastbound stage and spent the rest of my life being less than I am. Or you might have found another way, Daniel said. You're too stubborn to be kept down for long. Eleanor laughed. Maybe, but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out. I'm grateful for you, for this life, for everything we've built. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Tommy, no longer a boy, but a young man of 20 back from college in California, where he was studying agricultural science. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, he said, and Eleanor smiled at how he still used the formal address despite their years of friendship. I wanted to stop by before heading back to my family's ranch, to thank you. For what? Eleanor asked, though she suspected she knew. For everything. For not giving up on me when I was a stubborn kid who thought reading was useless. For showing me that education and ranching weren't opposites, that understanding science and literature and philosophy made me better at practical work, not worse. Tommy's voice was thick with emotion. I wouldn't be in college without you. Neither would half the kids from this area who went on to universities. You changed the trajectory of entire families. After he left, Eleanor found herself crying. The good kind of tears, the kind that came from being overwhelmed by the rightness of things. We did that, she whispered to Daniel. We actually did that. You did that, Daniel corrected. You're the teacher. We did it together, Eleanor insisted. Every student I taught, you supported. Every idea I had, you encouraged. Every doubt I faced, you answered with certainty. We did this together, Daniel. Everything we've accomplished has been partnership. The autumn of 1892 brought unexpected news. Eleanor was pregnant again, a surprise at 35 when she'd assumed her childbearing years were finished. The pregnancy was harder than her previous ones, leaving her exhausted and unable to teach full days. She fought it at first, trying to maintain her usual schedule, until Daniel gently confronted her. Eleanor, you're going to hurt yourself, he said, watching her struggle through morning sickness to prepare lessons. Let the other teachers handle more. Let me handle more at home. You don't have to do everything. I feel like I'm failing, Eleanor admitted. The students need me. The students need you healthy and whole, Daniel interrupted. And right now, you need to rest. There's no shame in that. You taught me that rest isn't weakness, it's wisdom. So Eleanor stepped back, letting her assistant teachers take over more responsibilities, spending more time with her existing children, reading and writing from home. It was strange at first, this slowing down, but she gradually found a different rhythm. She worked on a book of her own, finally, documenting her teaching methods and educational philosophy. If I'm going to be less mobile, she told Daniel, I might as well use the time to capture what I've learned. Maybe it'll help other teachers. Their fourth child, a son they named Robert, was born in March of 1893. The birth was difficult. Eleanor hemorrhaged badly, and for a terrifying few hours, Daniel thought he might lose her. But she fought through with characteristic stubbornness, and by morning she was nursing Robert and demanding to know how her students had performed on their latest examinations. You nearly died, and you're asking about test scores? Daniel said, incredulous, his eyes still red from crying. I nearly died, and I didn't, Eleanor corrected. So now I want to know about life continuing. Tell me about the students. Recovery was slow. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor was truly confined to home for months. She couldn't teach, couldn't walk the distance to the schoolhouse, could barely manage the stairs some days. It was frustrating and humbling and, eventually, enlightening. Maggie stepped up, helping care for baby Robert while pursuing her own advanced studies. Thomas took over some of the household management with surprising competence. Sarah, only 6, appointed herself Eleanor's entertainer, drawing pictures and telling elaborate stories to keep her mother's spirits up. They're so capable, Eleanor told Clara, who visited daily. I didn't realize how much I was still doing for them until I couldn't. That's the hardest lesson of motherhood, Clara said with a smile. Realizing our children don't need us as much as we need to be needed. By summer, Eleanor was stronger, able to return to teaching part-time. But something had shifted. She no longer felt the need to prove herself through endless work. She'd spent months watching her school run smoothly without her constant presence, had seen her children thrive with more responsibility, had discovered that her worth wasn't measured only by her productivity. "I'm going to teach 3 days a week," she announced to Daniel, "and spend the other days writing, being with the children, maybe developing curriculum for other schools to use. I'm 40 years old. It's time to work smarter, not just harder." "You're sure?" Daniel asked carefully. "You've always defined yourself through teaching." "I've defined myself through education," Eleanor corrected. "Teaching is one form of that. But writing, mentoring other teachers, raising our children to be thinkers and learners, those are all education too." The shift brought unexpected benefits. With more time for writing, Eleanor completed her book, Education as Liberation: Teaching Children to Think in the American West, which was published to significant acclaim in 1894. It became required reading in normal schools across the country, her methods studied and adapted by teachers from coast to coast. Daniel's fifth book, a philosophical work on the democratization of knowledge, was published the same year. They joked about competing with each other, but the truth was they were collaborating more than ever, editing each other's work, debating ideas, pushing each other to deeper understanding. "We're still teaching each other," Eleanor said one evening, reading a draft of Daniel's latest essay. "After all these years, we're still learning together." "I hope we never stop," Daniel said. "The day we think we know everything is the day we stop growing." Their children were growing in directions that both delighted and surprised them. Maggie, at 14, was corresponding with veterinary scientists, conducting her own experiments on ranch animals, determined to understand disease transmission. Thomas, at 12, had designed an irrigation system that Clara actually implemented, improving water distribution across the ranch. Sarah, at 8, had filled dozens of sketchbooks with detailed nature drawings that a visiting professor called scientifically accurate and artistically magnificent. And little Robert, toddling around at 2, showed signs of inheriting his parents' love of books, already sitting through entire picture books without losing attention. "We're raising remarkable humans," Daniel said one evening, watching Maggie explain her latest theory about disease vectors to Thomas. While Sarah drew diagrams to illustrate the concepts, and Robert looked on with solemn attention. "We're raising themselves," Eleanor corrected. "We just gave them permission to be remarkable." In the spring of 1895, Eleanor received a letter that brought everything full circle. It was from a women's college in Pennsylvania, offering her a position as Dean of Education. The salary was extraordinary, the prestige undeniable, the opportunity to influence education on a national scale clear. She and Daniel discussed it seriously over several days. The children were old enough that moving wouldn't devastate their education. The school they'd built could continue under capable leadership. It was, objectively, an incredible opportunity. "Do you want to go?" Daniel asked finally. "Not what you think you should do, not what's practical. What do you want?" Eleanor thought about Philadelphia, about the society that had rejected her for being too educated. She thought about prestigious salons and faculty dinners, about influence and recognition. Then she thought about Red Mesa Ranch, about the red mesas turning gold in sunset, about students who'd come from nothing and were going to universities, about a community that valued both strength and intellect. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "I want to watch Maggie become a veterinarian. I want to see what Thomas builds. I want to nurture Sarah's art. I want to raise Robert here, where education and practical life aren't separated. I want to keep working with students who need me, not impress administrators who want my credentials." "You're sure?" Daniel pressed. "This is everything you could have wanted 20 years ago." 20 years ago, I wanted validation from a society that didn't value me," Eleanor said. "Now I know my value. I don't need external validation. I have meaningful work, a partner who respects me, children who are becoming extraordinary people, and a community I've helped shape. Why would I leave that for prestige?" They declined the offer, and Eleanor felt nothing but relief. That summer brought a reunion that Eleanor had long since stopped hoping for. A telegram arrived from Denver. Her mother was there, traveling west with her second husband, and wanted to meet. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. Her mother had rejected her, had chosen a new husband over her own daughter, had made it clear that Eleanor's education was an embarrassment. Why should she grant an audience now? But Daniel, surprisingly, encouraged her to agree. "Not for her sake," he said. "For yours. You've spent 13 years building a life that proves you were right and she was wrong. Maybe it's time to show her that. Not to rub it in, just to close that chapter completely. So Eleanor agreed to meet them in Redemption Creek, which now boasted an actual hotel instead of the rough boarding house she'd stayed in all those years ago. Her mother was older, of course, grayer and thinner, but still carrying herself with that rigid propriety Eleanor remembered. Her husband was exactly as Eleanor had imagined, stiff, formal, disapproving. They met in the hotel dining room, awkward and tense. Eleanor's mother looked at her daughter, older now, more confident, wearing a practical dress instead of fashionable silk, and Eleanor saw the assessment in her eyes. "You look well," her mother said finally. "Motherhood suits you." "Thank you," Eleanor said coolly. "4 children now. The youngest is 2. 4. Her mother's eyebrows rose. "And you still teach, I'm told?" 3 days a week. The other days I write and work on curriculum development. My book was published last year. Eleanor saw her mother's husband wince at the word published, as if a woman writing books was still somehow scandalous. "And your husband?" her mother asked. "I understand he was a ranch foreman?" "He still manages Clara Bennett's ranch," Eleanor said evenly. "He's also a published author with 5 books to his name, a respected voice in educational reform, and the finest man I've ever known. We built our life together, equal partners in everything." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "When you left Philadelphia, when I let you leave, when I chose my new life over you, I was wrong." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "I thought I was protecting you," her mother continued. "I thought if you would just hide your intelligence, make yourself smaller, you'd be safe. You'd find a suitable husband, have a comfortable life. I thought your father had ruined you by educating you so thoroughly." "He didn't ruin me," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "He gave me the tools to build exactly the life I wanted. He believed I could be fully myself and still be loved. He was right." "I see that now," her mother said. "I see it in how you carry yourself, in the way you speak about your work and your family. You're not diminished by your education. You're elevated by it, and you found a man who sees that." She wiped her eyes. "I came here to apologize, Eleanor, to tell you I was a coward and a fool, and to ask if you might someday forgive me." Eleanor looked at this woman who'd birthed her but hadn't protected her, who'd chosen safety over solidarity, who'd let society's rules matter more than her own daughter's happiness. She felt anger, yes, but also something softer, pity, perhaps, or just the recognition that her mother had been as trapped by society's expectations as Eleanor had nearly been. "I forgive you," Eleanor said finally. "Not because what you did didn't hurt, but because holding on to that hurt doesn't serve me anymore. I have a good life, Mother, a life I built myself with Daniel despite your abandonment. I don't need your approval anymore, but I'm willing to offer you forgiveness." Her mother sobbed openly then, and Eleanor felt something release in her chest, an old wound finally healing over. They spent 3 days together, Eleanor showing her mother the school, introducing her to the children, letting her see the life that education and partnership had built. Her mother held baby Robert and watched Maggie conduct a science experiment and listened to Thomas explain his irrigation design and marveled at Sarah's artwork. "They're extraordinary," she said to Eleanor on the last evening. "All of them. And you did this. You and your husband together. You proved everything I believed was wrong." "I proved that limitation is learned, not inherent," Eleanor said gently. "That intelligence isn't unwomanly or threatening, just human. That love and intellect can coexist, that's all." When her mother left, they parted with more warmth than Eleanor had thought possible. They might never be close, but the old bitterness was gone, replaced by something like understanding. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked that night as they sat in their study. "Lighter," Eleanor said, "like I was carrying something I didn't even realize I was carrying, and I finally set it down." "Good," Daniel said simply. He pulled out his current notebook, filled with his careful handwriting. "I've been working on something, a memoir, I think, about our life, our journey. Not for publication necessarily, just for our children, so they understand how we got here." "Read me some," Eleanor said, curling up beside him. Daniel read passages about meeting her at the depot, about their first study sessions, about falling in love through learning. Eleanor listened with tears sliding down her cheeks, hearing their story reflected back through his eyes. "We should write it together," she said when he finished. "Your perspective and mine, woven together. A record of partnership." They worked on the memoir for the next 2 years, writing in stolen moments between teaching and ranching and raising children. It became a testament to what they'd built. Not a fairy tale with easy solutions, but an honest account of two people who'd found each other at their lowest points and built each other up. Clara read it when they finished and wept. "This is what I hoped for Thomas and me," she said. "This kind of true partnership. We had it for a while. I'm so glad you two found it." Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1898, at the age of 72. She left the ranch to Daniel and Eleanor equally, along with a letter. "You two have been the children I never had," she wrote. "You've honored Thomas's dream of making this ranch a place of learning as well as labor. Keep building, keep growing, keep proving that knowledge and hard work aren't opposites, but partners. I'm proud of you both. Continue making me proud." The funeral was attended by hundreds, ranch families, former students, teachers from across the territory, people whose lives Clara had touched. Eleanor delivered the eulogy, her voice strong despite her grief. "Clara Bennett believed in possibility," she said. "She believed a woman could run a ranch. She believed education mattered as much as cattle. She believed in giving people chances when society said they didn't deserve them. She gave me a chance when I had nothing. She gave this community a vision of what we could become. The best way we can honor her is to keep believing in possibility, keep taking chances on people, keep building the world she imagined." After Clara's death, Eleanor and Daniel restructured their lives significantly. Daniel took over full management of the ranch, running it as Clara had, with care for the land and the people who worked it. Eleanor expanded the school further, establishing a teacher training program so other frontier areas could have qualified educators. Their children, now ranging from 5 to 18, all contributed in their own ways. Maggie, at 18, had been accepted to veterinary school in California, one of the first women admitted. She would leave in the fall, nervous and excited. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked her daughter the night before she left. "It's going to be hard being one of the few women. People will doubt you." "Let them doubt," Maggie said fiercely. "You taught me that other people's doubts don't determine my capabilities. I know I can do this. I know I belong there. That's what matters." Eleanor hugged her daughter, this brilliant young woman she and Daniel had raised to be unapologetically herself. "You're right. You absolutely belong there. Show them what I already know, that you're extraordinary." Thomas, at 16, was working on the ranch while taking advanced correspondence courses in engineering. He planned to design water systems for arid lands, combining practical ranching knowledge with formal education. Sarah, at 12, had already sold several paintings and been commissioned to illustrate a botany textbook. She was quiet and dreamy, but utterly certain of her path. And Robert, at 7, was already showing signs of being a teacher himself, patiently explaining things to younger children, creating elaborate lessons for his dolls and stuffed animals. "We raised 4 completely different people," Daniel marveled one evening, watching their children interact. 4 completely themselves people. "That's what we wanted," Eleanor said. "Not copies of us, but themselves, fully realized." In 1900, Arizona Territory established a formal adult education program based entirely on Daniel's principles and writings. The territorial governor invited them to the inauguration ceremony in Phoenix, where Daniel was honored as the father of democratic education in the West. Standing before a crowd of hundreds, Daniel spoke about his journey from illiterate ranch hand to published author and respected thinker. He spoke about Eleanor, about partnership, about the transformative power of someone believing in your potential. "I was told my whole life that education wasn't for people like me," he said. "That formal learning was for the wealthy, the privileged, the properly credentialed. Then I met someone who asked me what I wanted to learn. Not what I was allowed to learn, not what was appropriate for my station, what I wanted to learn. That question changed everything." He looked at Eleanor sitting in the front row. "My wife taught me that intelligence isn't about access or credentials or class. It's about curiosity, dedication, and the courage to admit what you don't know. She taught me by example what true education looks like, not memorizing facts, but learning to think, not performing knowledge, but genuinely seeking understanding. The crowd erupted in applause, but Daniel kept his eyes on Eleanor, and she saw in them the same wonder and love she'd seen 13 years ago when he'd first asked her to teach him. That night, in their hotel room in Phoenix, they sat by the window looking out at the growing city. "Do you remember that first evening in Clara's library?" Daniel asked. "When I brought my notebook and pencil and you read Wordsworth to me?" "Of course," Eleanor said. "You said you didn't understand half the words, but you felt longing in the poem." "I was wrong," Daniel said. "I understood more than I thought. I understood that beauty exists in language, that ideas can be as powerful as actions, that there was a whole world I hadn't accessed yet." He took her hand. "You opened that world for me, Eleanor, not just through teaching me to read poetry and philosophy, but by showing me I was capable of understanding them." "You were always capable," Eleanor said softly. "You just needed permission to believe it." "And you needed permission to be fully yourself," Daniel countered. "We gave each other that permission. That's what partnership is. Not completing each other, but allowing each other to be complete." They returned to Red Mesa Ranch the next week, to their school and their home and their life. Maggie was away at veterinary school, sending weekly letters full of excitement and challenge. Thomas was designing a new water catchment system for the ranch. Sarah was working on a series of paintings depicting the changing seasons in the desert. Robert was teaching a group of younger children basic arithmetic using stones and sticks. Eleanor stood in the schoolhouse one afternoon, watching a new generation of students work through problems, ask questions, challenge assumptions. She was 53 now, her auburn hair threaded with silver, her face lined with years of desert sun and genuine smiles. She'd been teaching at Red Mesa for 17 years. A young teacher approached her, one of the many they'd trained over the years. "Mrs. Mercer, I have a question about your methods. You encourage students to question everything, even you. Doesn't that undermine your authority?" Eleanor smiled. "True authority doesn't come from demanding blind obedience. It comes from earning respect by being worthy of it. When students question me, it means they're thinking. That's the goal. I don't need them to accept everything I say. I need them to engage, to reason, to develop their own understanding." "But some of the other teachers say that children need firm guidance, clear rules. Children need both structure and freedom," Eleanor said. "Rules that make sense, explained clearly, applied fairly, and within those structures, freedom to explore, question, make mistakes, and learn from them. It's not either or. It's both and." She thought about her own journey, from Philadelphia to rejection to this school, this life. She thought about Daniel's journey from illiteracy to published author. She thought about their children, each finding their own path. She thought about students who'd gone on to universities, to meaningful work, to lives they'd chosen rather than lives chosen for them. This was the legacy they were building, not buildings or books, though those mattered. The legacy was people who knew how to think, who weren't afraid of questions, who understood that growth was always possible. That evening, she and Daniel walked to the site of their first home, the small house they'd built together, now used as a library annex. The sun was setting, painting the red mesas in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel put his arm around her waist, and they stood together as they had so many times before, watching the day end and anticipating the next one. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked quietly. "Giving up the chance to be famous, to influence education nationally, to have the recognition you deserved?" Eleanor thought about the Boston offer, the Pennsylvania deanship, the dozens of opportunities she'd declined over the years. She thought about what she might have had: prestige, influence, her name in textbooks. Then she thought about what she did have: a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love, children who were becoming exactly who they were meant to be, students whose lives she'd changed personally, not just theoretically, a community she'd helped shape, a legacy measured in transformed lives, not academic citations. "I don't regret a single choice," she said firmly. "This life, this exact life, is everything I never knew to dream of. You asked me to teach you everything I knew. Instead, we taught each other. We built something real and lasting. That's worth more than any fame. I love you, Daniel said simply. More than words can express. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You made me believe I could become more than I was. And you saw my intelligence as a gift instead of a threat, Eleanor replied. You asked me to be fully myself. You celebrated my mind instead of fearing it. You made me believe that I could be loved for exactly who I am. They stood together as the stars began to appear, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life that honored both of them. The woman who'd been called too educated and the man who'd asked to learn everything she knew had created something extraordinary, not through diminishment, but through expansion, not through limitation, but through liberation. Their children would carry forward the lessons they'd taught, Maggie in veterinary science, Thomas in engineering, Sarah in art, Robert in teaching. Each in their own way, each fully themselves, each proof that intelligence and authenticity could coexist. The school would continue long after Eleanor and Daniel were gone, training teachers, educating students, proving that location and circumstance didn't determine potential. Their books would be read by future generations, their methods adopted and adapted, their vision of democratic education spreading across the territory and beyond. But in this moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of their togetherness. Two people who'd refused to be less than they were. Two people who'd chosen partnership over convention. Two people who'd proven that the best love makes both people larger. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting together on the porch of their home watching their grandchildren play, Eleanor would remember that first conversation in Claire's library, Daniel asking her to teach him everything she knew. The vulnerability of that request, the trust it required, the partnership it promised. I never did teach you everything I know, she would say to him, her hand in his, both of them wrinkled and weathered by years of desert sun and hard work and joy. No? Daniel would reply with a smile. No, because I kept learning new things, and you kept teaching me. We never stopped growing, so there was always more to share, always more to discover together. That's the best kind of education, Daniel would say, the kind that never ends. And Eleanor would agree, thinking about the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination and mutual respect. The mail-order bride who'd been called too educated. The cowboy who'd said, teach me everything you know. Together, they'd proven that intelligence and love weren't just compatible. They were inseparable. That the best partnerships expanded rather than limited. That true education was about becoming more fully yourself, not less. She'd stepped off a dusty stagecoach in 1883, convinced her education was a curse. She'd been wrong. It had been a gift, waiting for someone wise enough to value it. And in valuing it, Daniel had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be exactly who she was meant to be. That was enough. That was everything. That was the happy ending neither of them had dared to imagine, but both of them had worked to build. One conversation, one lesson, one day of partnership at a time. As the sun set over Red Mesa Ranch for the 1,000th time, Eleanor Mercer, teacher, writer, mother, partner, felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Not perfect, but purposeful. Not easy, but meaningful. Not limited by what others said was possible, but expanded by what she and Daniel proved was real. She'd been called too educated. He'd asked to learn everything she knew. Together, they'd built a legacy that proved education and love weren't opposites, but partners, that intelligence and authenticity could coexist, that the best life was one lived fully, honestly, courageously. And that, Eleanor thought as Daniel squeezed her hand and the stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, was a lesson worth teaching, a story worth living, a truth worth proving over and over every single day.